My wife served me divorce papers at my retirement party while my children cheered. They thought they were clapping for my destruction, but they were actually applauding their own financial funeral. I calmly took a pen from my pocket, signed the papers right on top of the frosting of my retirement cake, and whispered into her ear, "You have no idea what you just did." 3 months later, they were begging on my doorstep, but the locks had already been changed. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives with a single signature, let me know which city you are listening from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not inherited. My name is Franklin Dubois. I am 68 years old, a black man who spent 40 years in logistics moving cargo across oceans and continents. My job was to foresee disasters before they happened and reroute around them. I was good at it. I built a fortune by being invisible, by being the man who fixed things in the shadows. But my biggest blind spot was the people living under my own roof. I thought I was raising a family. It turns out I was just financing a nest of vipers. Last Saturday was supposed to be a celebration. The backyard of my colonial-style house in Atlanta was decorated with white linens and expensive floral arrangements. It was my retirement party. After 4 decades of waking up at 4 in the morning, I was finally hanging up my hard hat. The air smelled of expensive barbecue and betrayal. I stood by the patio door holding a glass of champagne that I had paid for, watching my family circulate among the guests. I looked at my son, Terrence. He is 35 years old and still waiting for his big break. He stood near the bar wearing a suit I bought him, swirling his drink and staring at my wrist. He was not looking at me. He was looking at my vintage Rolex Daytona. It was a gift to myself 10 years ago. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was not seeing a watch. He was seeing seed money for his next failed startup. He had already crashed 3 companies, and he assumed my retirement lump sum was his safety net. Then there was Hunter, my son-in-law. He is a white real estate agent with a smile that never reaches his eyes. He had his arm around my daughter, Jasmine. Hunter was loudly telling a group of my former colleagues about his plans for my property. I heard him say the words, guest house and home theater. He was already renovating my house in his mind. He looked at me with that familiar, patronizing smirk he always wore. He treated me like a relic, an old man who had served his purpose and now needed to step aside so the young lions could eat. Jasmine was no better. She was busy taking selfies by the pool, ignoring the aunts and uncles who had traveled hours to be here. She posted a photo with the caption, "Dad is finally done time for new beginnings." She did not mean a new beginning for me. She meant a new beginning for her bank account. They all believed the myth. They thought that when I retired, I would cash out a multi-million-dollar pension and hand it over to them. They saw me as a walking ATM that was finally dispensing the jackpot. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted flat. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had spent my life protecting them from the harsh realities of the world. I shielded them from racism, from poverty, from want. And in doing so, I had crippled them. I had created monsters who thought they deserved the harvest without ever planting a seed. The music stopped. The DJ, a friend of Terrence, cut the sound. My wife Lucille stepped onto the small stage we had set up near the garden. Lucille is 65, but she fights age with the ferocity of a desperate woman. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight and too young for her. She tapped the microphone. The feedback screech made everyone wince. "Attention, everyone," Lucille said. Her voice was high and brittle. "We are here to celebrate Franklin. 40 years of hard work. 40 years of being away from home. 40 years of putting his job before his family." The guests shifted uncomfortably. This was not a toast. This was an indictment. I stayed where I was, leaning against the brick wall of the house I had paid for 3 times over. I watched her face. There was no love there. There was only greed and a strange, manic excitement. Franklin always talked about the future. Lucille continued pacing the stage like a predator. He always said we would enjoy life when he retired. Well, today is that day. And I have decided to give myself the best retirement gift possible. I am giving myself my freedom. The silence in the yard was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Lucille reached under the podium and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She did not hand it to me. She threw it. The envelope sailed through the air and landed with a wet thud right in the middle of the large sheet cake that said, "Happy Retirement, Frank." "I want a divorce, Franklin," she announced into the microphone, And since we are in a community property state, I am taking half the pension, half the house, half of everything you kept from us." I expected gasps. I expected my friends to rush forward. I expected my children to run to the stage and stop their mother from humiliating their father in front of 100 people. But that is not what happened. Terrence started clapping. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. He was grinning. Then Jasmine joined in. She let out a cheer like she was at a football game. "Go, Mom," she yelled, finally. Then Hunter raised his glass and shouted to new chapters. The applause grew. My children were cheering for the end of my marriage. They were celebrating the destruction of the family I had built. They looked at me with triumph. In their minds, this was a victory. If Lucille took half and they controlled Lucille, then they controlled the money. They thought they had just won the lottery. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was clarity. Total icy clarity. For years I had made excuses for them. I told myself they were just young, just confused. But in that moment, seeing Terrence clap while his mother served me divorce papers on a cake, the blindfold fell off. They did not love me. They loved what I could provide. And now that I was no longer useful as a worker, they were harvesting me for parts. I pushed off the wall. I walked slowly toward the table with the cake. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. They looked at me with pity. They thought they were watching a broken man. They thought they were watching a victim. They were wrong. I reached the cake. The envelope was stained with blue frosting. I picked it up. My hands were steady. I wiped the icing off the cover and pulled out the documents. It was a standard divorce filing. Irreconcilable differences. Demand for immediate division of assets. Demand for alimony. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. I took out my Mont Blanc fountain pen. It was the pen I used to sign shipping manifests worth millions of dollars. I uncapped it. The gold nib glinted in the sunlight. Lucille was standing in front of me, her chest heaving, waiting for me to explode. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to yell so she could play the victim one last time. She wanted to tell everyone how controlling and angry I was. I did not give her that satisfaction. I laid the document on the table right next to the ruined cake. I signed my name at the bottom of the decree. Franklin Dubois. The ink flowed black and permanent. Lucille looked confused. She blinked. "You are signing it." Just like that, I capped the pen and put it back in my pocket. I looked her dead in the eye. Her makeup was caked in the creases of her face. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. She had expected a fight. She did not know what to do with surrender. I leaned in close. I moved into her personal space until I could smell her expensive perfume and the alcohol on her breath. I lowered my voice so only she could hear. It was a low rumble, the sound of a storm that had already passed. "You have no idea what you just did, Lucille." I stepped back. I looked at Terrence, who had stopped clapping. I looked at Jasmine and Hunter. I memorized their faces. I wanted to remember exactly how they looked in their moment of perceived victory. I wanted to remember the smugness before the hunger set in. I turned around and walked toward the side gate. I did not go back into the house. I did not need to. In the trunk of my sedan parked in the driveway, I had a single duffel bag. I had packed it 3 days ago. A logistics man always has a contingency plan. I had sensed the shift in the wind months ago. I knew something was coming, even if I did not expect this level of cruelty. "Frank, where are you going?" Lucille shouted after me, her voice cracked. "We need to discuss the house. You need to vacate." I did not turn around. I kept walking. I walked past the shocked neighbors. I walked past the open gate. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and got in. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them in the rearview mirror. They were huddling around the cake, probably calculating how much the house would sell for. They were toasting again. They thought they had stripped the king of his crown. They did not know that the castle they were standing in was made of sand. They did not know that the name on the deed was not Franklin Dubois. They did not know that the credit cards in Lucille's purse were linked to a corporate account that I had closed 5 minutes before the party started. I drove down the street, the trees casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had saved for emergencies. It rang once. "Yes, Mr. Dubois." The voice on the other end was sharp and professional. It was Abernathy, my lawyer. "Initiate the protocol," I said calmly. The clean sweep Abernathy asked. "Yes," I said. "Cut the cards, lock the accounts, and notify the trust that the current occupants of the residence are unauthorized." "Consider it done," Abernathy said. I hung up. I did not look back at the house. I drove toward the city, toward the skyline where my real life was waiting. They wanted a divorce. They wanted independence. They wanted me out of the way. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, and it was going to destroy them. While I was navigating the rush hour traffic out of the suburbs, the carnival was just beginning, back at the house I had just vacated. I did not need to be there to know exactly what was happening because I had studied the habits of these parasites for decades. The moment my taillights disappeared around the corner, the pretense of sorrow or shock would have evaporated instantly. Hunter would be the first one to break the seal of decorum. He had been eyeing my private study for 3 years, waiting for the day he could turn it into what he called a man cave. I can see him now kicking open the double oak doors of my sanctuary with the heel of his cheap loafer. He would walk in like a conquering general entering a captured city. He would run his hands over the mahogany desk that I had imported from Brazil, a desk that cost more than the car he drove. He would sit in my leather chair and spin around, imagining himself as the lord of the manor. I knew that within minutes he would be on the phone with his contractor buddies. He would be talking loudly about ripping out the built-in bookshelves that held my collection of first editions to make room for a 90-inch television screen. He would talk about knocking down the wall between the study and the library to install a wet bar. He would not see the history in that room. He would not respect the silence I had cultivated there. He would only see square footage that he could colonize. Downstairs in the kitchen, Terrence would be conducting his own raid. He would bypass the champagne because that was for the guests. He would go straight to the cabinet above the refrigerator where I kept the good stuff. He would find the bottle of Macallan 50-year-old scotch that I had been saving for a special occasion. He would not know that a single glass of that whiskey was worth more than his monthly rent. He would crack the seal without a second thought and pour it into a red plastic cup. He would raise it to his sister Jasmine and say something foolish like to the old man finally getting out of the way. They would laugh. They would drink my scotch and eat the expensive catering I had paid for and feel like they had won the lottery. Lucille would be in the master bedroom. She would be standing in the middle of the walk-in closet, looking at the empty spaces where my suits used to hang. For a brief second, she might feel a pang of fear because the reality of my departure was physical and undeniable. But she would push it down. She would replace it with greed. She would start mentally calculating how much she could get for my golf clubs and how much the house would appraise for in the current market. She would look at the king-sized bed and think about how much better she would sleep without me there to remind her of her overspending. She would tell herself that she was the victim, that she deserved this house as compensation for putting up with a boring husband for 40 years. They were all celebrating a victory that did not exist. They were dividing up the spoils of war before checking to see if the enemy had actually surrendered. They were drunk on hubris and cheap ambition, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet was already crumbling. While they were desecrating my past, I was driving toward my future. I drove past the perimeter highway and headed straight for the heart of downtown Atlanta. The skyline rose up before me, glittering in the twilight like a beacon of achievement. I navigated the familiar streets until I reached the Sovereign, a glass tower that pierced the clouds. This was a building where captains of industry lived, where privacy was the most expensive commodity on the menu, and where nobody knew the name Franklin Dubois as a retired logistics manager. Here I was known simply as the tenant of Unit 402. I pulled into the private underground garage. The valet recognized my car immediately. He did not ask for a ticket. He simply nodded and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Dubois." I took the private elevator that required a biometric scan of my thumb to open. The ride was smooth and silent, rising 50 stories in a matter of seconds. When the doors slid open, I stepped into a world that Lucille and the children could not even imagine. My penthouse was a testament to the life I had built in the shadows. It was 3,000 square feet of modern minimalism. The floors were polished concrete, not the cheap carpet Lucille insisted on. The walls were adorned with abstract art from local black artists, not the mass-produced prints from a department store. The furniture was Italian leather, sleek and low to the ground. But the centerpiece of the apartment was the view. The entire north wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city I had helped build through my logistics network. I walked over to the wet bar and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The silence here was heavy and rich. It was not the lonely silence of the house in the suburbs where I was ignored. This was the silence of command. This was the silence of a man who had nothing left to prove. I sat down in my Eames lounge chair and looked out at the ribbons of light on the highway below. I could see the trucks moving cargo, the lifeblood of the economy. For years, I had been a silent partner in 3 major shipping firms. My family thought I was just a mid-level manager with a salary and a pension. They never asked where the extra money came from. They never asked how I paid for their private schools and their cars and their weddings. They just took and took and took, assuming the well was infinite. I had bought this apartment 5 years ago under a shell company. It was my escape hatch. It was the place I came to when the disrespect at home became too much to bear. I would tell Lucille I was going on a business trip, and I would come here to breathe. I would come here to be Franklin the businessman, not Franklin the doormat. This place was my secret sanctuary, and tonight it became my permanent fortress. I looked around the room and felt a profound sense of relief. There were no pictures of ungrateful children here. There were no reminders of a loveless marriage. There was only clean lines and the cold, hard comfort of success. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was time. I did not hesitate. I dialed the number for Abernathy. It was late, but I knew he would answer. Abernathy was not just a lawyer, he was a shark in a 3-piece suit, and sharks never sleep when there is blood in the water. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Dubois," Abernathy said. His voice was calm and professional. "I assume the party is over." "The party is just beginning, Abernathy," I replied, looking at the city lights. "But not the one they think they are attending. Initiate Operation Clean Sweep." I could hear the smile in Abernathy's voice. It was a cold, dry sound. "I have the paperwork ready to file. The cease and desist orders for the property are drafted. The notification to the utilities companies is queued for tomorrow morning. And the bank accounts, kill them," I said. My voice did not shake. "Kill them all. The joint checking. The credit cards linked to my Social Security number. The emergency fund Lucille has access to. Freeze everything. Mark them as stolen if you have to. I want every card they swipe tomorrow to be declined. I want every check they write to bounce so hard it cracks the ceiling." "Understood," Abernathy said. "And the trust enforce the residency clause," I said. "The trust explicitly states that the property is for the primary residence of the grantor. If the grantor is no longer residing there, the authorization for dependents to occupy the premises is revoked immediately. They are trespassing as of this moment." "It will be a pleasure," Abernathy said. "I will have the process server there within 48 hours. Should I warn them?" "No," I said. "Let them find out when the lights go out. Let them find out when the water stops running. Let them find out when the sheriff knocks on the door." They wanted independence, Abernathy. I am giving them a crash course in self-reliance. I hung up the phone. The screen glowed in the semi-darkness. I looked at the device in my hand. It was the only link I had left to my old life. It contained the text messages from Jasmine asking for money. It contained the voicemails from Lucille complaining about my schedule. It contained the history of my servitude. I turned the phone over and popped the back case off. I removed the battery. Then I took out the small SIM card. It was a tiny piece of plastic, but it held so much weight. I walked over to the kitchen counter where I had a heavy marble mortar and pestle that I used for cooking. I placed the SIM card in the bottom of the mortar. I did not smash it in rage. I did it with the precision of a surgeon. I ground the pestle down, crushing the chip until it was nothing but plastic dust and silicon fragments. I swept the debris into the palm of my hand and walked to the sleek trash compactor built into the cabinetry. I tossed the dust inside and pressed the button. The machine hummed for a second and then fell silent. It was done. Franklin, the husband, was dead. Franklin, the father, was retired. The man standing in the penthouse looking out over the city was someone else entirely. I was the silent king, and I had just raised the drawbridge. I walked back to the window and took a sip of my water. I wondered if Terrence was enjoying the whiskey. I hoped he savored it, because it was the last drink he would ever have on my dime. Tomorrow, the hangover would begin, and it would last for the rest of their lives. The morning sun hit the windows of my penthouse with a brilliance that felt like a blessing, but across town, Lucille was waking up to a delusion. She believed that yesterday was the start of her new life as a wealthy, independent woman. She had no idea that she had actually woken up in a financial cage that I had locked from the outside. Her routine was predictable because for 20 years I had paid the bills that supported it. She drove her Mercedes to Lumiere Spa in Buckhead. It was a place where the air smelled of eucalyptus and money, and where the staff was trained to tolerate the abuse of women like my wife. Lucille walked in like she owned the building. She did not greet the receptionist, a young girl named Sarah, whom she had made cry on at least 3 occasions. She simply tossed her coat on the counter and demanded the Platinum Rejuvenation Package. This was a $500 treatment that involved gold leaf masks and imported algae. She was spending money she did not have to celebrate a victory she had not won. I can imagine her lying on the massage table instructing the therapist to press harder, complaining that the towels were not fluffy enough, and talking loudly about her divorce. She would have told anyone who would listen that she had finally shed the dead weight of her husband. She probably said that I was holding her back, that I was cheap, and that now she was going to live the life she deserved. She was mentally spending the alimony checks. She was renovating the kitchen. She was booking trips to Paris. She was building a castle in the sky while the foundation was being dynamited. When the treatment was over, Lucille walked to the front desk with her skin glowing and her nose in the air. She reached into her Louis Vuitton bag and pulled out the black card. It was a heavy piece of titanium that made a satisfying clatter when she threw it onto the marble countertop. This card was her identity. It was the magic wand that had solved every problem she ever had. "Put it on the card," she said without looking at Sarah, "and add a 10% tip. Do not get greedy." Sarah picked up the card and inserted it into the chip reader. Lucille checked her reflection in the mirror, adjusting her hair. The machine let out a harsh buzz. Lucille frowned. "Try it again," she snapped. "You probably put it in wrong." Sarah tried again. Another buzz, a little louder this time. A red light flashed on the terminal. "Mrs. Dubois, the card is being declined," Sarah said softly, trying to be discreet. Lucille laughed. "That is impossible. That card has a limit of $50,000. Run it again. And make sure you are doing it right this time." Sarah swiped the magnetic strip. Declined. Lucille's face turned a shade of red that the facial could not hide. She snatched the card back. She pulled out a second card, the gold Amex. This was the backup. "Use this one," she hissed. "And hurry up, I have a lunch reservation." Sarah ran the gold card. Declined. "Please contact issuer." The silence in the lobby was absolute. Other customers were watching. The ladies who lunched the socialites, Lucille desperately tried to impress, were pretending to look at their phones, but they were listening to every word. "There must be a system error," Lucille shouted. Her voice was rising to that screeching pitch I knew so well. "My husband is Franklin Dubois. Do you know who he is? He probably forgot to pay the bill. Typical." She pulled out a third card, a Visa. Declined. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. It was not just embarrassment. It was the sudden cold realization that the magic wand was broken. She had to write a personal check from a checkbook she rarely used just to leave the building. As she walked out, she did not look like a queen. She looked like a fugitive. While Lucille was suffering her public humiliation, the shockwave was hitting the rest of the family. Terrence was in a coffee shop in Midtown meeting with a potential landlord for his new office space. He had found a loft that cost $3,000 a month. He had told the landlord that his father was an investor and that the funding was secured. He handed the landlord a check for the deposit and the first month rent. He was smiling that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. But while they were shaking hands, Terrence's phone buzzed. It was a notification from his banking app. He looked down. His face went pale. The notification read, "Check returned. Insufficient funds. Account overdrawn." Terrence tapped the screen frantically. He tried to refresh the page, hoping it was a glitch. But the numbers did not change. His balance was negative. The monthly transfer of $3,000 that I sent him on the first of every month had not arrived. The landlord looked at him, suspicious of the sudden sweat on Terrence's forehead. "Is everything all right, Mr. Dubois?" Terrence stammered. I think there is a mistake with the bank. My father usually transfers the funds by now. Let me just call him." He dialed my number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. The landlord took the check back from the table. "Call me when the money is real," the landlord said, and walked away, leaving Terrence sitting there with a cup of coffee he could no longer afford. Across town, Jasmine was in her apartment surrounded by open boxes. She was online shopping, filling her cart with designer shoes and handbags. She needed a new wardrobe for her new single life, now that Hunter was out of the picture, legally speaking, even though they were still plotting together. She clicked place order. Payment failed. She groaned and typed in the card number again. She thought she had mistyped a digit. She hit enter. Payment failed. Contact your financial institution. She tried to order a pizza because she was stressed. The food delivery app rejected her card. She tried to order an Uber to go to her mother's house. Rejected. Panic is a contagious disease. Within 10 minutes, they were all calling each other. Jasmine called Lucille, screaming that her cards were broken. Terrence called Lucille, shouting that I had forgotten the transfer. Hunter was calling, asking why the gas station pump had just rejected his fuel card. They all converged on Lucille's phone. "Mom, fix this," Jasmine screamed. "Dad is messing with us. Call the bank." Lucille pulled her car over to the side of the road. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. She dialed the number on the back of the black card. The private wealth management line. She waited for the operator. She was ready to scream. She was ready to demand that someone be fired. "Thank you for calling First National. This is David. How can I help you?" "David, this is Lucille Dubois," Lucille shouted. "My cards are not working. My children's cards are not working. This is unacceptable. I want this fixed immediately." "One moment, Mrs. Dubois. Let me check the account." There was a pause. The hold music played a cheerful tune that sounded like mockery. "Mrs. Dubois," David said, and his voice had changed. It was no longer warm. It was the voice of a man delivering a coroner report. "I see here that the primary account holder, Mr. Franklin Dubois, closed these accounts this morning at 9 a.m. "Closed them?" Lucille gasped. "But that is impossible. I am his wife. I am on the account." "You are an authorized user, Mrs. Dubois," David corrected her. "You are not a joint owner." The primary account holder has the right to revoke access and close lines of credit at any time without spousal consent if the accounts were established prior to the marriage or under a separate business entity. These accounts are linked to Dubois Logistics, LLC. "But we have money," Lucille screamed. "We have millions." "Mr. Dubois withdrew the balance via cashier check this morning," David said. "The current balance on your authorized cards is 0. In fact, there is a pending balance for the spa treatment you just tried to charge, which will be sent to collections if not resolved." Lucille dropped the phone. It slid between the seats. She stared at the dashboard. She felt like the floor of the car had fallen out. He had taken the money. He had taken it all. Just then, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was the only sound in the car. She retrieved the phone with trembling fingers. The email was from me. The subject line was blank. She opened it. There was no greeting. No long explanation. No anger. Just one sentence. "Congratulations on your freedom. I have removed the financial chains that were holding you back." "Good luck!" Lucille screamed. It was a primal sound of rage and terror that echoed inside the luxury car she could no longer put gas in. She realized then that the divorce papers she had thrown at me were not a weapon. They were a suicide note, and she had just pulled the trigger. The house was silent, but the air inside was thick with desperation. It was 24 hours after the credit cards had been declined, and the reality of their situation was beginning to set in like a rot in the floorboards. But Hunter, my son-in-law, was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who looked for shortcuts. He had convinced himself that the financial freeze was just a temporary glitch or a cruel game I was playing. He believed the ultimate trump card was the house itself. It was a 5,000 square foot colonial estate in one of the most prestigious zip codes in Atlanta. In his mind, it was a winning lottery ticket just waiting to be cashed. Hunter had called the most aggressive real estate agent in the city, a man named Marcus Sterling, who was known for closing deals in under a week. Hunter had spent the morning dragging Lucille around the house, forcing her to stage the rooms. They moved furniture to cover worn spots on the carpet. They angled the blinds to catch the best light. They were preparing to sell the very roof over their heads because they needed liquid cash to maintain the lifestyle they felt entitled to. When Mr. Sterling arrived in his silver Porsche, Hunter greeted him at the door like he was the lord of the manor. Hunter was wearing one of my old golf shirts that was too big for him, trying to project an image of casual wealth. Lucille stood behind him, wringing her hands nervously. She looked 10 years older than she had at the party. The confidence she had displayed on stage when she served me the papers was gone, replaced by a frantic hunger for security. Hunter led Mr. Sterling into the foyer, sweeping his arm across the space. "As you can see, the bones of the place are magnificent," Hunter said, his voice loud and booming. "We are looking at a listing price of $1.8 million, but we are motivated sellers, so we might accept $1.5 for a cash offer. We want a quick close. My mother-in-law is looking to downsize to a penthouse in the city now that she is a single woman." Lucille managed a weak smile. "Yes," she said. "It is just too much house for one person." Hunter did not let the agent speak. He took him on a whirlwind tour. He pointed out the crown molding in the dining room. He bragged about the imported marble in the kitchen. He talked about the pool house as if he had built it with his own hands. He was selling a fantasy. He was talking about how the market was hot and how this house was a jewel. He was spending the commission in his head before the contract was even signed. "You see the potential here, right?" Hunter asked as they stood on the back patio looking out over the garden I had tended for decades. "You could easily put another guest suite above the garage. This is a developer dream. We just want to get the liquidity out so we can move on to our next investments." Mr. Sterling was a professional. He listened quietly, taking notes on his tablet. He tapped the walls. He checked the foundation. He looked at the roof. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just observed. Hunter took his silence for awe. "So can we have the listing up by this afternoon?" Hunter pushed as they walked back into the living room. "We want an open house this weekend." Mr. Sterling sat down at the large mahogany dining table. He placed his tablet in front of him. He looked from Hunter to Lucille. His expression was unreadable. "The house is certainly impressive," Mr. Sterling said. "The location is prime. The square footage is desirable. Based on the comps in the neighborhood, your valuation of $1.5 million is not unreasonable." Hunter slapped the table triumphantly. "Boom!" he shouted. "I told you, Lucille. I told you we were sitting on a gold mine. $1.5 million. That is $750,000 for you, and we can use the rest to seed my new venture. We are back in business." Lucille let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 2 days. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God." Mr. Sterling held up a hand. "However," he said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Before we can proceed with the listing agreement, I need to verify the title and ownership details. It is standard procedure. I just need to pull up the public records from the county database." "Of course," Hunter said, leaning back in his chair. "It is under Franklin and Lucille Dubois, joint tenants, standard married couple stuff. But she has the divorce filing, so she has the right to sell half or force the sale. We have already talked to a lawyer." Mr. Sterling tapped on his screen. The room was silent except for the sound of his finger hitting the glass. Hunter was grinning at Lucille. Lucille was closing her eyes, imagining the money hitting her account. Mr. Sterling stopped tapping. He frowned. He swiped the screen and tapped again. He adjusted his glasses. "Is there a problem?" Hunter asked, his smile fading slightly. Mr. Sterling looked up. His eyes were cold and confused. "Mrs. Dubois, are you sure you are on the deed to this property?" Lucille opened her eyes. "Of course I am," she snapped. "I have lived here for 30 years. I raised my children here. It is my house." Mr. Sterling turned the tablet around so they could see the screen. "I am afraid that is not what the county records say," Mr. Sterling said. "According to the deed recorded in 1990, this property is not owned by Franklin Dubois or Lucille Dubois." Hunter leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Then who owns it?" he demanded. "The owner of record is the Dubois Family Heritage Trust," Mr. Sterling read. So what Hunter said, waving his hand dismissively. "That is just a fancy way of saying Frank owns it. And if Frank owns it, Lucille owns half. It is marital property." Mr. Sterling shook his head slowly. "That is not how it works, I am afraid. I took the liberty of pulling the trust summary since it is a matter of public record. This is an irrevocable trust established before the marriage. The grantor is Franklin Dubois. The sole beneficiary is the Dubois Foundation, a charitable organization for underprivileged youth." Lucille's face went white. "No," she whispered. "That is a lie. He told me he bought this house for us. He told me it was our home." Mr. Sterling looked at the document again. "He did buy it, Mrs. Dubois. But he bought it in the name of the trust. And here is the clause that concerns you." He scrolled down. Clause 4, Section B. "The grantor reserves the right to reside in the property for his lifetime. Upon his vacating the property or his death, the property reverts to the control of the trust board. Any other occupants are considered guests at the discretion of the grantor." The room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. The numbers 1.5 million evaporated into thin air. The dream of the penthouse vanished. The seed money for Hunter business disappeared. Hunter stood up. His face was turning a violent shade of purple. You are telling me that this house belongs to a charity. I am telling you that Mrs. Dubois does not have the legal standing to sell this property, Mr. Sterling said, packing up his tablet. In fact, technically speaking, if Mr. Dubois has permanently vacated the premises as you indicated earlier, you might be trespassing right now. Get out! Hunter screamed. He slammed his hand on the table. You are lying. Frank put you up to this. Get out of my house. It is not your house, Mr. Sterling said calmly, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. And I suggest you consult a real estate attorney very quickly. Good day. The agent walked out, leaving the front door open. The sound of his Porsche engine fading away was the sound of their last hope dying. Lucille sat frozen in her chair. She was staring at the wall, but she was seeing the last 30 years of her life playing back like a horror movie. She realized with a sick feeling in her gut that Frank had never trusted her. He had known. He had known since 1990 that this day might come. He had built a wall around his assets before he even put a ring on her finger. She thought she was the queen of the castle, but she was just a squatter in a museum. Hunter turned on her. The transformation was instant and terrifying. The charming son-in-law who had poured her wine and encouraged her to leave Frank was gone. In his place was a desperate, cornered rat. You lied to me, Hunter hissed. I did not lie. Lucille stammered, her voice trembling. I did not know. He never told me. You said you were worth millions, Hunter shouted. He kicked a chair and it crashed into the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. You said if you divorced him, we would get half. You said we would be set for life. I quit my job because of you. I leveraged my credit because of you. I thought we owned it. Lucille cried, tears streaming down her face. We lived here. We paid the taxes. He paid the taxes, Hunter screamed. He paid for everything. You never paid a dime in your life. You are useless, Lucille. You are a broke old woman with nothing to offer. Do not speak to me like that. Lucille stood up, trying to summon some dignity. I am your mother-in-law. You are a fraud, Hunter spat at her. You tricked me. You tricked Jasmine. You made us think there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and now look at us. We are standing in a house we cannot sell with credit cards we cannot use. He paced around the room, running his hands through his hair. What am I supposed to do now, huh? I owe money to people you do not want to meet. I promised them I would pay them back when the house sold. What am I supposed to tell them now? That my mother-in-law is a tenant. That she owns nothing but her clothes and her bad attitude. Lucille backed away from him. She had never seen him like this. She looked for Terrence or Jasmine to defend her, but they were not there. She was alone with the monster she had welcomed into her family. You need to fix this, Hunter growled, moving closer to her. You need to call him, call Frank, beg him, tell him you made a mistake, tell him you were crazy. I do not care what you do, but you get him to sign this house over to you. I cannot. Lucille sobbed. He will not answer. He hates me. Then make him stop hating you, Hunter yelled right in her face. Because if we get thrown out on the street, I am not taking you with me. You hear me. If this ship goes down, I am pushing you off first. Hunter stormed out of the room, heading for the liquor cabinet that was now the only source of comfort in the house. Lucille stood alone in the grand dining room. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was mocking her. The crystal chandelier above her head tinkled softly in the draft from the open door. It belonged to the trust. The table she leaned on belonged to the trust. The rug beneath her feet belonged to the trust. She walked to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn. She realized she did not even own the grass. She had served Frank divorce papers to gain her freedom, but instead she had signed herself into absolute poverty. And the man she had called weak and boring had played a game of chess against her for 3 decades, and she had not even known she was on the board. The courtroom was colder than the morgue and smelt of floor wax and desperate lies. It had been only 72 hours since I cut off the money supply, but Lucille had managed to secure an emergency hearing. She claimed I was committing financial abuse. She claimed I had left her destitute and starving in a mansion without electricity. It was a bold move born of panic and directed by a cheap lawyer she had hired on a contingency basis. I sat at the defendant table wearing my best charcoal suit. My hands were folded on the table. Beside me sat Abernathy, who looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He was arranging a stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing his instruments. I looked across the aisle at Lucille. She had transformed. The woman who wore Chanel to the grocery store was gone. In her place sat a fragile old lady wearing a gray cardigan that I recognized from 10 years ago. She had washed off her makeup to show the dark circles under her eyes. She slumped in her chair, trying to look smaller, trying to look like a victim who had been crushed by a tyrant. It was a performance that would have garnered applause on Broadway, but we were in the Superior Court of Fulton County, and the judge was a woman named Eleanor Vance, who was known for having zero patience for theatrics. Lucille took the stand. Her lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who looked like he slept in his car, guided her through the testimony. Lucille wept without tears. She told the court that I was a controlling monster who hoarded millions while she had to beg for grocery money. She claimed that I had blindsided her with the divorce and threw her to the wolves. He turned off the power, Your Honor. Lucille sobbed, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. I am sitting in the dark. I have no food in the refrigerator. He canceled my credit cards without warning. I have given him the best years of my life, and he is trying to starve me into submission. I am asking for $10,000 a month in temporary spousal support just to survive until the trial. Her lawyer looked at the judge with righteous indignation. This is a clear case of abandonment, Your Honor. Mr. Dubois has millions in assets, and he is using his wealth to punish his wife. We ask that the court intervene immediately to restore the status quo. Judge Vance looked at me over her reading glasses. She did not look impressed, but the law is the law. Mr. Dubois, she said, her voice stern, financial retaliation is looked upon very unfavorably in my courtroom. Do you have a response? Abernathy stood up. He did not rush. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the witness stand. He was holding a single piece of paper in his hand, but the table behind him was groaning under the weight of 3 bankers' boxes filled with files. We do, Your Honor, Abernathy said, his voice smooth as silk. But first, I would like to ask Mrs. Dubois a few questions to clarify the definition of destitute. Lucille stiffened. She hated Abernathy. She had always called him the Undertaker because he never smiled. Mrs. Dubois Abernathy began. You claim that my client controlled every penny and that you had no access to marital funds. Is that correct? Yes, Lucille said, lifting her chin. He gave me an allowance like a child, and you claim you have no savings because he did not allow you to save. Correct. That is right, Lucille said. Abernathy walked back to the table and picked up a thick binder. He dropped it in front of Lucille. It landed with a heavy thud that made her jump. Let us talk about the allowance, Abernathy said, flipping the binder open. Exhibit A. These are the credit card statements for the last 5 years. Can you please read the highlighted total for the year 2023? Lucille looked at the page. She stayed silent. Read it, Mrs. Dubois Abernathy commanded. It says $140,000, Lucille whispered. I cannot hear you, Abernathy said. $140,000, Lucille snapped. Thank you, Abernathy said. $140,000 in discretionary spending. That is roughly $12,000 a month. That is more than most families earn in a year. And that was just on one card. He flipped the page. Let us look at what you spent this money on. Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, the spa at the Ritz-Carlton. And here is an interesting one. $5,000 a month to an entity called Greenfelt LLC. Do you know what that is, Mrs. Dubois? Lucille's face turned pale. I do not recall, she stammered. Allow me to refresh your memory, Abernathy said. Greenfelt LLC is the holding company for an online casino application, specifically a slot machine game. According to these records, you spent $60,000 last year playing virtual slots on your iPad, the courtroom murmured. Judge Vance leaned forward. $60,000, Mrs. Dubois Abernathy repeated. While you were claiming my client was hoarding money, you were gambling away a fortune. But that is not all. Abernathy went back to the boxes. He pulled out another binder. This one was red. Exhibit B. These are bank transfers from the joint checking account, an account you had full access to. Here we see a transfer of $25,000 on June 4th. The recipient is listed as Terrence Dubois. Can you explain this? He needed help with his business, Lucille said, her voice rising. He is our son. He is a 35-year-old man, Abernathy corrected her. And this was not a loan, it was a gift. And here is another one, $15,000 in August, $10,000 in September, And here's a transfer of $50,000 to a Hunter Construction Group. That would be your son-in-law, Hunter, correct? He was going to renovate the guest house, Lucille said. It was an investment in a house you do not own, Abernathy said. But we will get to that. The point, Mrs. Dubois, is that in the last 5 years you have withdrawn or spent over $500,000 of marital assets. You did not save it. You did not invest it. You gambled it. You gave it to your adult children who refused to work. And you spent it on luxury goods. Abernathy paused to let the numbers sink in. Lucille was shaking now, not from cold but from rage. She was being stripped naked in front of strangers. You claim you are destitute, Abernathy continued, his voice hardening. But the forensic accounting shows that you have actually spent more than your equitable share of the marital estate already. In fact, if we divide the assets today, you would owe Mr. Dubois money. That is a lie, Lucille screamed. She stood up in the witness box. He has millions. He has offshore accounts. He has the pension. Mr. Dubois has a pension. Yes, Abernathy said calmly. But let us look at the structure of that pension. Exhibit C. He handed a document to the judge. Your Honor, as you can see, this is a defined benefit plan. However, Mrs. Dubois signed a waiver 15 years ago in exchange for a lump sum cash payment of $200,000, which she used to purchase a vacation condo in Florida. A condo which she subsequently sold 2 years later at a loss to pay for her daughter's wedding. Lucille's eyes went wide. She had forgotten. She had forgotten the waiver. She had forgotten the condo. She had lived in the moment for so long that she had erased her own history. I did not know what I was signing, she cried. He tricked me. You had your own counsel review it at the time, Abernathy said, pointing to a signature at the bottom of the page. Is that your signature, Mrs. Dubois? Lucille looked at the paper. It was her handwriting. Big looping letters. Arrogant letters. Yes, she whispered. So to summarize, Abernathy said, turning to the judge, the plaintiff has spent over $500,000 in 5 years. She gambled away $60,000 last year alone. She gave tens of thousands to her adult children. She waived her right to the pension years ago. And now she comes to this court claiming poverty and demanding that my client, who has retired and is living on a fixed income, continue to fund her gambling addiction and her children. Failure. Abernathy closed the binder. We ask that the motion for temporary support be denied. Furthermore, we ask that the plaintiff be ordered to pay the legal fees for this hearing, as it is a frivolous abuse of the court system. Lucille looked at her lawyer. Mr. Sterling was staring at his shoes. He knew he had been outgunned. He had walked into a gunfight with a plastic spoon. Judge Vance cleared her throat. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. She looked at Lucille with a mixture of pity and disgust. Mrs. Dubois, the judge said, I have seen many cases of financial abuse in my career. This is not one of them. What I see here is a case of gross financial irresponsibility. You have treated your husband's bank account like an endless buffet, and now that the kitchen is closed, you are upset that you have to pay the bill. But, Your Honor, Lucille started. Quiet, the judge snapped. The evidence is overwhelming. You have had access to significant funds and you squandered them. You claim poverty, but your bank statements show a lifestyle of excess that most people only dream of. The fact that you spent $60,000 on a phone game while claiming to be a victim is frankly insulting to this court. Judge Vance picked up her pen. The motion for temporary spousal support is denied. Lucille gasped. Denied, she choked out. But how will I eat? How will I live? I suggest you get a job, Judge Vance said without looking up. Or perhaps your son and daughter, whom you have so generously supported over the years, can return the favor. The judge signed the order. Furthermore, due to the frivolous nature of this motion and the clear evidence that the plaintiff attempted to mislead the court regarding her financial status, I am granting the defense request for attorney fees. Mrs. Dubois, you are ordered to pay $5,000 to Mr. Dubois' counsel within 30 days. $5,000? Lucille shrieked. I do not have $5. Then I suggest you sell some of those handbags I saw on the credit card statement, Judge Vance said. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I did not look at Lucille. She was slumped over the witness railing, weeping uncontrollably. This time the tears were real. She was not crying for the marriage. She was crying because for the first time in her life she was facing consequences. I walked out of the courtroom with Abernathy. As we passed the bench, Lucille looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen. Frank, she whispered. Frank, please. You cannot do this. They will starve. Hunter will leave Jasmine. Terrence will go to jail. I stopped. I looked down at her. I did not feel hate. I did not feel love. I felt the indifference of a man watching a distant storm. They are adults, Lucille, I said softly. And so are you. Welcome to the real world. I walked out into the hallway. The air was fresh. The sun was shining through the windows. I checked my phone. There were 5 missed calls from Terrence and 3 from Jasmine. They had heard the news. The gravy train had not just derailed, it had fallen off a cliff and exploded. Abernathy walked beside me, putting his files into his briefcase. That went well, he said dryly. It went exactly as planned, I said. Send the bill to her address. She cannot pay it. Abernathy noted. I know, I said. But the collection agency will enjoy the chase. I walked toward the elevator. I had won the battle, but the war was not over. Lucille was down, but desperate people do desperate things. And I knew that now that the legal route had failed, they would try something else. They would try to manipulate my heart. But they had forgotten that they had spent 40 years turning my heart into stone. And stone does not bleed. While Lucille was facing the music in the courtroom, her son Terrence was facing a siege of his own across town. The headquarters of Titan Tech Solutions was actually just a rented glass-walled office in a trendy co-working space in Midtown, but Terrence had sold it to his investors as the nerve center of the next big thing. Today, however, it looked more like a crime scene. 2 large men wearing leather jackets were standing at the reception desk. They were not investors. They were debt collectors from a private lending firm that charged interest rates that would make a bank manager faint. They had been banging on the glass door for 20 minutes, scaring away the freelance graphic designers and coffee drinkers who shared the floor. Terrence was not in his ergonomic executive chair. He was hiding in the handicap stall of the men's restroom down the hall. He was sitting on the closed toilet lid with his knees pulled up to his chest like a frightened child. His Italian suit, which cost $2,000, was soaked through with sweat. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped his phone into the tiles. He could hear the voices outside. They were shouting his name. They were asking the receptionist where the CEO was. They used words like fraud and immediate repayment. Terrence squeezed his eyes shut. He had borrowed $50,000 last month to cover the lease and the lease on his Range Rover, expecting my monthly allowance to cover the payments. He had built his entire life on the assumption that the Bank of Franklin Dubois would never close. He dialed my number for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The phone rang once, twice, then it clicked over. You have reached the voicemail of Franklin Dubois. I am currently retired and enjoying my life. Please do not leave a message. The beep that followed was the sound of a lifeline being cut. Terrence almost threw the phone against the stall door. He typed a text message. His fingers were slippery with sweat. Dad, please pick up. It is an emergency. Men are here. They are going to hurt me. I need the transfer. Just this one time. I promise I will pay you back. The message failed to send. Service suspended. He stared at the red exclamation mark on the screen. He had forgotten. His phone bill was part of the family plan. I had cut that too. He was trapped in a toilet stall with no money, no service, and 2 angry loan sharks waiting 20 feet away. He realized with a jolt of terror that he was not a businessman. He was just a guy in a suit with a negative bank balance. He waited until he heard the elevator ding and the heavy footsteps of the men fading away. They were probably going down to the lobby to wait for him. Terrence saw his chance. He scrambled off the toilet and unlocked the stall. He splashed cold water on his face, but it did nothing to wash away the fear. He did not go back to his office. He did not grab his laptop or his briefcase. He ran for the fire exit. He rushed down 12 flights of stairs, tripping over his own expensive shoes. He burst out into the alleyway behind the building. The sunlight blinded him. He felt like a rat scurrying in the shadows. His car was in the front garage, but he knew they would be watching it. He had to leave it. He had to run. He hailed a taxi on the corner. He did not have cash, but he prayed he could convince the driver to wait once they got to his destination. He gave the driver the address of Dubois Logistics, the massive distribution center near the airport where I had worked for 40 years. In his desperate mind, I was the only solution. He convinced himself that if he could just see me face to face, he could charm me, he could explain, he could make me open the wallet one last time. The taxi ride took 45 minutes. Terrence spent the entire time rehearsing his speech. He would cry. He would talk about his potential. He would blame the economy. He would say anything. When the taxi pulled up to the main gate of the complex, Terrence told the driver to wait. "I will be right back," he said breathlessly. "My father owns this place. He will pay you double." The driver looked skeptical but nodded. Terrence jumped out and ran toward the main glass doors of the headquarters. He expected to walk right in as he had done a few times when he was a child. He expected the receptionists to smile and wave him through because he was the son of Franklin Dubois. He pushed the revolving door and stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lobby. It was a cathedral of commerce. High ceilings, marble floors, and the hum of serious business. He walked toward the security turnstiles. A large man in a gray uniform stepped in front of him. He was built like a vending machine and had a face that suggested he did not enjoy jokes. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked. Terrence tried to straighten his tie. He tried to summon the arrogance that usually got him what he wanted. "I am here to see Franklin Dubois," Terrence said. "I am his son Terrence. Let me through." The guard did not move. "Do you have an appointment?" "I do not need an appointment," Terrence snapped. "I am family. Is he in his office?" The guard looked at a tablet mounted on the desk. He tapped the screen a few times. "Mr. Dubois is no longer an active employee on this site," the guard said. "He retired on Saturday. His access credentials have been converted to board member status, which requires pre-authorization for visitors. Board member status." Terrence frowned. "What are you talking about? He was a logistics manager. Just call him. Tell him I am downstairs. It is life or death." "I cannot do that, sir," the guard said. "Mr. Dubois has flagged his profile. No unauthorized visitors, specifically family members." Terrence felt his blood run cold. Specifically family members. I had anticipated this. I had blocked him at the door before he even arrived. "You do not understand." Terrence shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "I need to see him. I know he comes here. Where is he?" "Sir, you are causing a disturbance," the guard said, placing a hand on his belt. "I am going to have to ask you to leave." "I am not leaving until I get my money!" Terrence screamed. He tried to push past the guard. He wanted to run to the elevators. He wanted to storm the executive suite. The guard moved with surprising speed. He grabbed Terrence by the arm and spun him around. It was not violent, but it was firm. It was the grip of authority handling a nuisance. "Sir, leave now or I will call the police," the guard said. "And trust me, you do not want the police running your ID right now." The threat of police snapped Terrence back to reality. He thought about the debt collectors. He thought about the bounced checks. Police meant records. Records meant jail. He pulled his arm free. "Fine," he spat. "Fine, I am leaving. But you tell him I was here. You tell him his son came for help and he turned his back." The guard did not answer. He just pointed to the door. Terrence turned around. He was defeated. He was broken. He began the long walk back to the revolving door. As he walked past the main reception desk, something caught his eye. The company had recently renovated the lobby. On the far wall there was a new installation. It was a Hall of Legacy, a series of bronze plaques and portraits dedicated to the people who had built the company from a regional shipper into a global giant. Terrence stopped. He saw a face he recognized. But it was not the face of the man who mowed the lawn on Sundays. It was not the face of the man who sat quietly at dinner while Lucille complained about the wine. It was a portrait of me. The photo was black and white, professional, artistic. I was looking at the camera with a gaze of absolute steel. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. Terrence walked closer. He read the inscription under the name Franklin Dubois, Senior Strategic Advisor and Architect of the Global Supply Chain Network, Silent Partner and Founding Investor, 1985. Present. The man who steered the ship through 3 recessions. Terrence read the words again. Founding Investor, Silent Partner. His knees almost gave out. He grabbed the railing for support. He had spent his entire life thinking I was a worker bee. He thought I was a mid-level employee who got lucky with savings. He had mocked me for being boring. He had laughed at my packed lunches. He had called me a dinosaur behind my back. But the plaque told a different story. I was not just an employee. I was one of the owners. I was a titan. The millions he thought I was hoarding were not just savings. They were dividends. I was not a man who worked for the company. I was the company. Terrence looked around the massive lobby. The trucks outside the ships in the harbor, the planes in the sky. I had built a piece of all of it, and Terrence, his son, had treated me like a servant. He realized then why I had never bragged. Lions do not need to roar to prove they are lions. They just are. And Terrence was just a jackal who had been nipping at the heels of a king. He looked at the taxi waiting outside. He knew he could not pay the fare. He knew he had nowhere to go. He looked back at my portrait one last time. The bronze eyes seemed to follow him, mocking his failure. "You never knew me, did you, boy?" I seemed to say from the wall. Terrence lowered his head. He walked out into the heat, knowing that the shadow he had tried to escape was the only thing that had ever kept him cool. And now he was burning. The atmosphere inside the colonial house on Willow Creek Drive had shifted from desperation to open warfare. It was the fourth night without financial support, and the strain was turning the family members into caged animals. The electricity was still on for now, but the internet had been cut remotely by my service provider, leaving them isolated from their digital addictions. Jasmine was sitting on the expensive beige sofa, clutching her phone like a lifeline that had been severed. She was trying to upload a story to Instagram to maintain appearances, but her data plan had hit its limit. She looked up at Hunter, who was pacing the living room floor wearing the same clothes he had worn yesterday. "You need to do something," Jasmine snapped, her voice shrill and accusatory. "We have no food in the fridge except for some old condiments and a bag of frozen peas. The car has a quarter tank of gas. You are supposed to be the man of the house, Hunter. You are supposed to fix this." Hunter stopped pacing and glared at her. His eyes were bloodshot and frantic. "Do not talk to me about fixing things, Jasmine. I am the only one trying to find a solution here. Your brother is hiding in his room crying because he cannot go to his office. Your mother is popping Xanax like candy in the bedroom, and you are worried about your social media following. I am worried about survival," Jasmine screamed, standing up. "You told us to sell the house. You brought that agent here and humiliated us. You said we were sitting on a gold mine, but we are sitting on a rental property that we do not even own. You are a fraud, Hunter. My father was right about you." Hunter crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her by the shoulders. He did not hit her, but the violence in his grip made her gasp. "Do not ever compare me to him," he hissed. "Your father is a thief. He stole my future. He stole the capital I was promised, and you are just like him. You are spoiled and useless. You thought the money would never run out. Well, guess what, princess, the tap is dry." He shoved her back onto the sofa. Jasmine started to sob, burying her face in the cushions. Hunter looked at her with disgust. He realized then that he did not love her. He had loved the proximity to my wallet. He had loved the idea of being the heir to the Dubois empire. Without the money, Jasmine was just a demanding woman with expensive taste and no skills. Hunter walked into the kitchen and opened the liquor cabinet. It was empty. Terrence had finished the last of the vodka earlier that afternoon. Hunter slammed the cabinet door so hard the glass rattled. He needed money. He needed it tonight. His creditors were not the kind of people who accepted excuses. They sent guys with baseball bats. He looked around the house. It was filled with things. Expensive things. Things that belonged to the trust. Things that belonged to me. He narrowed his eyes. If the house belonged to the trust, then the contents were technically just sitting there. And who would know? I was gone. Lucille was oblivious. Jasmine was useless. He could take a few things. Just enough to pay off the loan sharks. Just enough to buy some time. He told himself it was not stealing. It was an advance on his inheritance. It was survival. The house fell silent around 2 a.m. The only sound was the wind rattling the window panes and the occasional sob from Jasmine sleeping on the sofa because she refused to share the bed with Hunter. Hunter waited until he was sure everyone was unconscious. He dressed in black sweatpants and a dark hoodie. He pulled on a pair of leather driving gloves. He felt a rush of adrenaline. He was no longer a failed real estate agent. He was a man taking control of his destiny. He crept down the hallway, his socks sliding silently on the hardwood floors. He had a target in mind. For years he had walked past the collection of African art that I had curated. He had never understood it. He thought it was ugly and primitive. But he knew what it was worth. He had Googled the artists once out of boredom. He stopped in front of a large carved wooden mask mounted on the wall near the library. It was a 19th century ceremonial mask from the Ivory Coast. I had bought it at an auction in London for $20,000. To Hunter, it looked like a pile of cash. He reached up and lifted it off the hooks. It was heavier than he expected. He tucked it under his arm. He moved into the library. On the mantelpiece sat a pair of silver candlesticks from the colonial era. They were heavy, solid, sterling silver. Hunter grabbed them and shoved them into the duffel bag he had brought with him. He swept the room with his flashlight, avoiding turning on the main lights. He saw the small bronze statue on the desk, a Remington replica. He swiped it. He was getting greedy now. The fear was replaced by a manic confidence. He walked to the wall where my most prized possession hung. It was a painting by a renowned Harlem Renaissance artist. It was a small piece depicting a jazz scene in the rain. I loved that painting. I would stand before it for hours, letting the colors wash over me. Hunter only saw the signature in the corner. He took the painting down. The frame was heavy gold leaf. He set it on the floor and pulled out a pocket knife. He began to pry the canvas out of the frame. He did not care about damaging the edges. He just wanted the canvas so he could roll it up and carry it out. The sound of the wood cracking seemed deafening in the quiet house, but nobody stirred. He worked quickly, sweating despite the cool air. He imagined the cash in his hand. He imagined paying off the debt and maybe having enough left over for a hotel room and a steak dinner. He felt smart. He felt cunning. He told himself that I owed him this. I had abandoned them, so I had forfeited my right to these things. He rolled up the canvas and secured it with a rubber band. He looked around for one last score. He spotted the collection of vintage fountain pens on the desk, my Mont Blanc collection. He scooped them up by the handful and dumped them into the bag. He zipped it up. It was heavy. It felt like freedom. He crept toward the back door, intending to load the loot into his car and drive to a fence he knew in the city. He reached for the handle of the patio door, his heart pounding with excitement. High above the city in the cool darkness of the penthouse, I was sitting in my Eames chair with a cup of chamomile tea. The room was dark except for the glow of the iPad in my lap. I was not sleeping. I rarely slept more than 4 hours a night. Old habits from the logistics business die hard. I was watching the screen with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. The security system I had installed in the house was state-of-the-art. It did not just have cameras. It had motion sensors and night vision capabilities. I had received a notification on my phone 10 minutes ago. Motion detected in the library. I tapped the screen to switch camera angles. The image was in crisp black and white. I saw him. I saw Hunter. He looked ridiculous in his hoodie, looking over his shoulder like a cartoon villain. I watched him take the mask. I watched him shove my silver into his bag. But when I saw him take the knife to the painting, my jaw tightened. That painting was not just an object, it was a gift from my late mother. It was the first piece of real art I had ever bought. Seeing his hands desecrate it, seeing him treat it like a piece of scrap to be pawned, triggered a cold fury in my gut. He thought he was stealing from a senile old man. He did not know he was performing for an audience of one. I took a sip of tea. I set the cup down on the glass table. I did not call Lucille. I did not call the private security firm to scare him off. That would be too easy. That would be a slap on the wrist. Hunter had crossed a line. He was no longer family. He was a criminal, and criminals belong in the system. I pressed the home button on the iPad and opened the phone app. I dialed 3 numbers. 911. The operator answered on the first ring. Emergency services. My name is Franklin Dubois. I said calmly, my voice steady and low. I am the owner of the property at 450 Willow Creek Drive. I am watching a live feed from my security cameras. There is an intruder in the house. Is he armed? The operator asked. I see a knife in his hand. I lied slightly. He was using it to cut the painting, but a knife is a knife. He is looting the property. He has a large bag filled with valuables. Are you in the house, sir? No, I am at a remote location, I said. But my ex-wife and her children are sleeping upstairs. They are in immediate danger. We are dispatching units now, sir, the operator said. Stay on the line. I watched the screen. Hunter was at the back door, struggling with the lock. He was fumbling with the keys because his hands were shaking. He did not know that the silent alarm had already been tripped the moment he cut the canvas. He did not know that 3 patrol cars were already turning onto the street, running silent without sirens. I watched him open the door. I watched him step out into the night, thinking he had gotten away with it. Run, rabbit, run, I whispered to the screen. I did not feel sadness for the boy. I did not feel pity for my daughter who was about to wake up to a nightmare. I felt the satisfaction of a ledger being balanced. You cannot steal what you did not earn. And tonight, Hunter was going to learn the price of admission to the real world. The silence of the night was shattered not by a siren, but by a voice amplified through a megaphone that sounded like the voice of God himself. Hunter had just stepped off the back porch with the heavy duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He was grinning in the darkness, thinking about how easy it had been to plunder the house of the man he despised. He had taken 3 steps onto the manicured lawn when the floodlights blinded him. These were not the garden lights. These were the high-intensity tactical lights of 3 Fulton County police cruisers that had silently surrounded the perimeter. "Hunter, freeze," the voice boomed. "Drop the bag and get on the ground. Now." Hunter froze. His brain could not process the shift from predator to prey. He squinted into the blinding light shielding his eyes with the hand that was not holding the stolen loot. He saw the silhouettes of officers behind the doors of their cars, their weapons drawn and leveled at his chest. "I said get on the ground," the officer shouted again. "Do it now or we will deploy the K-9 unit." Hunter dropped the bag. The sound of heavy silver candlesticks clanking against each other echoed in the yard. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling violently. He lay flat on the wet grass, the cold dampness soaking through his expensive sweatpants. "Do not move," the officer commanded. 2 officers moved in. They were efficient and rough. One of them placed a knee in the center of Hunter's back, driving the air out of his lungs. Hunter gasped, spitting grass and dirt. He felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into his wrists. They were tight, much tighter than he had imagined. "You are making a mistake," Hunter wheezed as they hauled him to his feet. "I live here. This is a misunderstanding. You can explain it to the judge," the officer said, dragging him toward the driveway. By now, the commotion had woken the entire neighborhood. The flashing red and blue lights were bouncing off the white siding of the colonial houses, creating a disorienting strobe effect. Mrs. Higgins, the nosy neighbor from across the street, was already on her porch in her bathrobe filming the entire scene with her phone. Other neighbors were peering through their curtains, witnessing the downfall of the Dubois family in high definition. The front door of the house flew open. Lucille and Jasmine ran out wearing their silk pajamas, looking terrified and disheveled. They stopped dead when they saw Hunter being shoved into the back of a police cruiser, his head pushed down by the officer hand. Hunter Jasmine screamed, running toward the car. "What are you doing?" "Let him go. That is my husband." "Ma'am, step back," the officer warned, holding up a hand. "This is an active crime scene." "Crime scene," Lucille stammered. "What crime?" "He lives here." "He was apprehended exiting the property with a bag full of valuables," the officer said, pointing to the evidence bag another officer was tagging. "We have a confirmed report of burglary from the property owner." "I am the property owner," Lucille shouted, her voice shrill with panic. The officer looked at his notepad. "Are you Franklin Dubois?" "No, I am his wife," Lucille said. "Ex-wife," the officer corrected. "According to the report in the deed, this property belongs to a trust managed by Mr. Dubois. He is the one who called it in. He is watching the security feed right now." Lucille looked up at the house. She saw the small red light blinking on the security camera under the eaves. She realized with a jolt of horror that I had been watching. I had seen everything. I had watched them turn on each other, and now I was watching them fall. Jasmine was hysterical. She was banging on the window of the police car, screaming Hunter name. Hunter was crying in the back seat, his face pressed against the glass, looking like a trapped animal. The shame was absolute. The neighbors were whispering. The police were impassive. The illusion of their status was not just cracked, it was shattered into a million pieces on the driveway. Jasmine pulled her phone out of her pocket. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped it twice before she managed to dial. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call a bail bondsman. She called the only person who had ever fixed anything in her life. She called me. I was still sitting in my chair at the penthouse watching the scene unfold on my iPad. I saw Jasmine on the screen holding the phone to her ear, tears streaming down her face. My phone rang. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to feel the weight of the silence. Then I answered. "Dad." "Thank God," Jasmine sobbed. "Dad, you have to stop them. They are taking Hunter. They are arresting him." "I know, Jasmine," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of any emotion. "I am the one who sent them." "What?" Jasmine screamed. "How could you?" "He is family. He was just borrowing some things to sell because we are starving. You cut us off, Dad. You made him do this." "I did not make him pick up a knife and cut my mother painting out of its frame," I said. "I did not make him steal the silver your grandmother polished for 40 years. He made a choice, Jasmine. He chose to become a thief." "But he is your son-in-law," Jasmine cried. "You cannot send him to prison. Please, Dad, Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them he had permission. If you do this, you are destroying my marriage. Your marriage was built on my bank account, Jasmine, I said. And as for permission, the trust is very clear. Unauthorized removal of assets is a felony. I have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets of the foundation. If I let him steal, I would be complicit. You are talking like a robot, Jasmine shrieked. You are talking about laws and trusts. I am talking about your family. Do you not love us? I loved you enough to work for 40 years to give you everything I said. And you loved me enough to clap when your mother handed me divorce papers. You loved me enough to try to sell my home out from under me. This is not about love, Jasmine. This is about consequences. Dad, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. The police have the evidence, I said. The video file has already been uploaded to their server. It is out of my hands. I suggest you call a public defender. I hear they are free for people who cannot afford a lawyer. I hung up. I watched on the screen as Jasmine lowered the phone slowly. She looked at the camera lens. She knew I was there. She collapsed onto the driveway, sobbing into her hands. Lucille stood over her, looking lost and gray in the flashing lights. For the first time in her life, Lucille could not demand to speak to a manager. The manager had quit, and he had taken the keys with him. 2 hours later, the drama had moved from the manicured lawn of suburbia to the sterile, fluorescent purgatory of the precinct holding area. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Hunter was sitting in an interrogation room, handcuffed to a metal table. The arrogance that had defined him was gone. He was just a man in sweatpants facing 5 to 10 years for grand larceny. A detective walked in. He tossed a file on the table. We have the video, the detective said, sitting down. We have the items found on your person. We have the statement from the owner. You are looking at a serious stretch of time, son, unless you have something to tell me. Hunter looked up. His eyes were red. What do you mean? The detective leaned in. You are the son-in-law, right? People usually steal from family for 2 reasons, drugs or debt. But sometimes they are put up to it. Was this your idea, Hunter? Or did someone tell you to strip the house? Hunter's brain started to race. He thought about Jasmine sleeping on the couch. He thought about Lucille popping pills and complaining. He thought about how they had pushed him. They had pressured him to find money. They had told him to fix it. It was her, Hunter whispered. Who, the detective asked. Lucille, Hunter said louder. My mother-in-law. She told me to do it. The detective raised an eyebrow. The ex-wife. Yes, Hunter said, nodding frantically. She said it was technically her stuff. She said since the divorce was pending, she had a right to half the assets. She told me to take the silver and the art and sell it so we could buy food. I was just following orders. I was trying to help her. Hunter was lying partially, but in his mind it was the truth. Lucille had demanded money. She had created the pressure cooker. The detective stood up. Stay here. 20 minutes later, Lucille was led into the room. She was not in handcuffs, but she looked like a prisoner of war. She had been brought in for questioning as a potential accomplice. When she saw Hunter, she rushed toward the table. Hunter, tell them, Lucille pleaded. Tell them you were just confused. Tell them we did not mean to steal. He told us everything, Mrs. Dubois, the detective said, leaning against the wall. He says you masterminded the whole thing. He says you ordered him to liquidate the assets to hide them from the trust. Lucille's mouth fell open. She looked at Hunter. Hunter refused to meet her eyes. He stared at the metal table. You liar, Lucille breathed. You filthy little liar. I never told you to steal. I told you to talk to a lawyer. You told me to fix it, Hunter shouted, slamming his cuffed hands on the table. You told me you needed money for your spa treatments and your pills. You told me the house was yours. You lied to me, Lucille. You made me think we were safe and then you pushed me off the cliff. I took you into my home, Lucille screamed. I let you marry my daughter. You were a broke real estate agent with nothing and I gave you a life. You gave me a trap, Hunter yelled back, and now I am going to prison because of your greed. Well, I am not going down alone. You knew, Lucille. You saw me put the bag in the car. You watched me. That makes you an accessory. The detective watched them with a look of bored amusement. It was the classic prisoner dilemma. When the ship sinks, the rats eat each other. Stop it, Lucille shrieked. She turned to the detective. Arrest him. He is a thief and a liar. I am a victim here. My husband abandoned me, and now this criminal is trying to frame me. You are both under investigation, the detective said calmly. Hunter, you are being booked for grand larceny. Mrs. Dubois, you are free to go for now, but do not leave the state. If we find evidence that you coordinated this, you will be in the cell next to him. Lucille walked out of the interrogation room shaking. She looked back at Hunter one last time. There was no family left. There was no loyalty. Just two drowning people trying to climb on top of each other to breathe. As she walked out of the police station into the cold morning air, Lucille realized she had no ride. Her car was out of gas. Jasmine was at home, hysterical. And Frank, whom she had called a monster, was the only one sleeping soundly in a warm bed. She sat down on the curb and buried her face in her hands, waiting for the sun to rise on a life that was completely destroyed. The letter carrier arrived at 10 in the morning, and for the first time in years, he did not wave at the house. He simply shoved a bundle of envelopes into the mailbox and drove away quickly, as if he could smell the misfortune radiating from the property. Inside the house, the atmosphere was heavy, with a silence that was about to become permanent. Lucille was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold coffee because the coffee maker had stopped working halfway through the brew cycle. She thought it was just a broken appliance, another thing to blame on my absence, but she was wrong. Upstairs, Jasmine was in the shower trying to wash away the humiliation of the night before. She had spent hours crying about Hunter, and she wanted to feel clean. She was standing under the rain shower head that I had installed last year, a fixture that cost more than her first car. Suddenly, the steady stream of hot water sputtered. It turned into a trickle, and then it stopped completely. Jasmine turned the handle frantically. She waited for the water to return, but the pipes only groaned. She stood there shivering with shampoo in her hair, wrapped in a wet towel, realizing that the luxury she took for granted was not a right, but a privilege I had revoked. At the same moment, Terrence tried to turn on the television in the den. He wanted to watch the news to see if his brother-in-law arrest was being reported. He pressed the power button. Nothing happened. He checked the plug. He checked the outlet. He walked over to the light switch and flipped it up and down. The crystal chandelier remained dark. The hum of the central air conditioning system, which had been a constant background noise for decades, faded away, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Lucille heard Jasmine screaming from the bathroom and Terrence shouting from the den. She walked slowly to the front door and opened it. She walked to the mailbox. Her hands were trembling as she pulled out the stack of envelopes. They were not bills. They were final notices. She opened the one from the electric company first. The text was bold and read. Service to this address has been terminated effective immediately at the request of the account holder. She opened the water bill. Service disconnected. Account closed. She opened the gas bill. Service suspended. She stood in the driveway holding the papers that confirmed their exile. The neighbors were watering their lawns. Their air conditioners were humming. Their lives were moving forward while the Dubois house had been paused. I had not just stopped paying the bills. I had instructed the utility companies to remove the meters entirely because the property was supposed to be vacant. In the eyes of the city, my family did not exist. They were ghosts haunting a shell of a house. By early afternoon, the mansion that Lucille had always called her palace had transformed into a tomb. Without the air conditioning, the Georgia heat began to seep through the walls. The air inside became stagnant and heavy. The darkness was not just a lack of light, it was a presence. It crept out of the corners as the sun began to set, casting long shadows that looked like prison bars across the floor. The worst part was the smell. For years, Lucille had insisted on stocking the refrigerator with the most expensive perishables. There was organic milk-aged cheeses, imported meats, and fresh seafood. Now, without power, the refrigerator was slowly warming up. The bacteria were beginning to multiply. The smell of spoiling luxury began to waft into the kitchen. It was the scent of decay. It was the scent of a lifestyle that had passed its expiration date. Terrence walked into the kitchen, wiping sweat from his forehead. He opened the fridge door out of habit, and the stench hit him. He gagged and slammed it shut. "We have to do something," Terrence said, his voice cracking. "It is 80 degrees in here. All the food is going to rot." "What do you want me to do?" Lucille snapped. She was sitting by the window trying to catch a breeze. "Call him," Terrence said. "Call Dad. Tell him this is illegal. You cannot cut off utilities to a house with people in it." "It is not illegal," Terrence, Lucille said quietly. He told them the house was empty. And legally, he is right. We are not supposed to be here. "So, we just sit here and rot," Terrence shouted. "I cannot charge my phone. I cannot shower. I look like a bum." "You are a bum," Lucille said, staring out the window. "We all are." As the sun went down, the house plunged into true darkness. They had no flashlights, because I was the one who kept the emergency kit in the garage, and Hunter had sold the kit at a pawn shop 2 days ago for $20. They had to scavenge for decorative candles, the scented ones Jasmine bought for $50 apiece. Lucille sat at the dining room table. She lit a candle that smelled of lavender and vanilla. The flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on her face. She looked around the room. The expensive furniture, the silk drapes, the hand-woven rugs. In the flickering light, they looked sinister. The house felt massive and hostile. Without the electricity, without the hum of technology, the house felt like a beast that had swallowed them whole. She looked at Terrence and Jasmine. They were sitting on the floor, their faces illuminated by the weak candlelight. They looked like refugees. Jasmine was trying to file her nails, but she gave up. Terrence was just staring at the wall. They were silent because there was nothing left to say. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the hunger and the heat. Lucille stared at the flame, and for the first time in 30 years, she allowed herself to remember the truth. She remembered the early days when we were poor. She remembered how I used to fix the leaky faucet in our first apartment because we could not afford a plumber. She remembered how I used to double-check the locks every night to make sure she was safe. She remembered how I always made sure the bills were paid a week early because I hated debt. She had called me boring. She had mocked my spreadsheets and my schedules. She had told her friends that I was a control freak. But sitting in the dark, sweating in her designer clothes, she realized that my control was the only thing that had kept chaos at bay. I had been the dam holding back the flood, and she had dynamited the dam thinking she could swim. She looked at her hands. They were soft, manicured hands that had never done a hard day of work. They were useless hands. "Frank," she whispered to the empty room. She realized then that I had not just provided money. I had provided order. I had provided a shield against the harsh realities of the world, and she had thrown it all away for a fantasy of independence. She was independent now. She was free from my rules. She was free from my schedules. And she was sitting in the dark in a house that smelled of rotting meat, waiting for the sheriff to come and throw her onto the street. I should have listened, she thought. I should have appreciated the lights when they were on. A tear rolled down her cheek, hot and salty. It was the first genuine tear she had shed since the divorce began. It was not a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of mourning. She was mourning the death of her own comfort, and she knew with a terrifying certainty that the sun would rise tomorrow, but the lights in the Dubois house would never come back on. While my family sat in the sweltering darkness of a house that was slowly rejecting them, I stepped into the climate-controlled ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. The air here was crisp and smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. I adjusted the cuffs of my tuxedo. It was a bespoke suit made of Italian wool, the kind of garment Lucille used to say was a waste of money for a man like me. She always told me I looked like a chauffeur in a suit. But tonight, nobody looked at me like a servant. I walked through the double doors, and the room turned to face me. This was the annual Logistics and Commerce Gala, a gathering of the most powerful people in the state. For years, I had attended these events quietly, standing in the back, observing, listening, and making the connections that built my fortune. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was the guest of honor. The moment I entered, the conversation hushed, and then a wave of applause rippled through the crowd. It was not the polite applause given to a retiree. It was the robust, rhythmic clapping of peers acknowledging a master. Men who controlled shipping fleets and women who ran international trade zones walked over to shake my hand. They did not ask me to fetch them a drink. They asked for my opinion on the Asian markets. They asked if I would consider sitting on their boards. I moved through the room with a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I felt a vitality coursing through my veins that I had not felt in decades. At home, I was the old man who chewed too loud or walked too slow. Here I was the sage. I was the architect. I saw young executives looking at me with admiration, wanting to know the secret of how I built an empire from the shadows. I took the stage when my name was announced. The spotlight hit me. It was bright and warm. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the mayor of Atlanta at table 1. I saw the CEO of the Port Authority. I stood tall. My back did not hurt. My hands did not shake. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. My voice was deep and steady, booming through the high-quality sound system. For 40 years, I have worked in the business of moving things I began. We move cargo, we move resources, we move the economy. But the most important thing I learned is not about movement. It is about stillness. It is about knowing where you stand when the storm hits. The room was silent, hanging on my every word. I built my life on the principle of quiet value, I continued. I never sought the spotlight. I never asked for applause. I believed that the work would speak for itself. But I also learned a hard lesson recently. I learned that if you stay silent for too long, people will mistake your patience for weakness. They will mistake your generosity for obligation. I paused, taking a sip of water. I knew the cameras were rolling. I knew this was being live streamed. We live in a world that celebrates the loud and the flashy, I said. We chase the quick buck and the instant fame. But legacies are not built on Instagram. They are built on integrity. They are built on loyalty. And tonight I am announcing the launch of the Dubois Foundation Scholarship. This fund is not for my family. It is for the young men and women in this city who have the hunger to work but lack the means. I am investing in a new family. A family chosen by character, not by blood. The applause that followed was deafening. It was a thunderous validation of my existence. I looked out at the crowd and smiled. It was a genuine smile. I was free. I was powerful. And I was just getting started. Miles away in the suffocating heat of the Colonial House on Willow Creek Drive, a very different scene was unfolding. The darkness was absolute save for the flickering light of a single dying candle on the coffee table. The air was thick and humid, smelling of stale sweat and the rotting food from the kitchen. Lucille, Jasmine, and Terrence were huddled around Jasmine's phone. It was the only device with a sliver of battery life left. They were using the last megabytes of a prepaid data plan that Terrence had managed to scrape together with loose change found in the sofa cushions. The video on the small cracked screen was buffering. The image froze and started again, pixelated and jerky. But even through the low-quality connection, the image was unmistakable. They watched me on the stage. They saw the tuxedo. They saw the crystal chandeliers sparkling above my head. They heard the applause. Lucille stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She looked at the man on the stage, the man she had divorced, and she could not reconcile him with the husband she had despised. On the screen, I looked distinguished. I looked handsome. I looked like a king. "He looks so young," Lucille whispered. Her voice was dry and cracked. "He never looked like that with me." "That is because he was miserable with you," Jasmine snapped. She was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. She looked at the screen with a mixture of jealousy and hunger. "Look at those people, Mom. Look at the jewelry on the women at his table. That could have been us. We should have been there. We would be there if you had not served him papers," Terrence muttered. He was lying on the rug, shirtless because of the heat. He watched his father commanding the room, and he felt a deep sick twisting in his gut. He realized that the man on the screen was a stranger who had millions of dollars to give away to strangers while his own son sat in the dark. The video stuttered again. The little spinning wheel of death appeared on the screen. "Come on, load." Jasmine hit the phone. "Do not die now." The video resumed. They watched me announce the scholarship. They heard me say the words, "A family chosen by character, not by blood." The words hit them like physical blows. Lucille flinched. Terrence looked away. Jasmine let out a small whimper. I was publicly replacing them. I was telling the world that they had failed the test of character. I was giving their inheritance to kids from the inner city kids they would have looked down on a week ago. The contrast was brutal. On the screen there was champagne and light and future. In the room there was only darkness and heat in the past. They were watching their own erasure in real time. Hunter, who had been released on bail that morning, stood in the doorway of the living room. He had not said a word since he came back. The shame of the arrest and the looming trial had silenced his usual bravado. He leaned against the doorframe, watching the phone screen over Jasmine's shoulder. On the video, the speech ended. I walked down the steps of the stage. The camera followed me as I made my way to the VIP table. A tall man with silver hair and a sharp suit stood up to greet me. He opened his arms and hugged me like a brother. Hunter squinted at the screen. He recognized that man. He had a poster of that man in his old office. He had read that man's autobiography 3 times. "That is," Richard Sterling Hunter whispered, his voice trembling. "Who cares?" Lucille said bitterly. "Just another rich old man." "You do not understand," Hunter said, walking closer to the phone. "That is Richard Sterling, the developer. The man who built the Skyline Tower. He is the biggest real estate mogul in the Southeast. I have been trying to get a meeting with his assistant for 5 years. I sent him letters. I sent him business plans. He never answered. Hunter watched as Richard Sterling put his arm around my shoulder and laughed at something I said. He watched as the great tycoon poured me a drink. He watched the ease of our friendship. He knows him, Hunter said, his voice rising in disbelief. Frank knows Richard Sterling. They are friends. They look like best friends, Terrence added, twisting the knife. Hunter fell to his knees beside the coffee table. He stared at the small glowing screen with a look of absolute devastation. If I had known, he whispered. If I had known Frank knew him, I could have asked for an introduction. One meeting, one handshake. That is all I needed. My career would have been made. I could have been rich. He looked up at Lucille, his eyes wide with horror. I was living with a winning lottery ticket, Hunter said, and I threw it in the trash because you told me it was worthless. I did not know, Lucille cried defensively. He never talked about work. Because you never listened, Hunter shouted. You never asked. You just complained. He looked back at the screen. I was shaking hands with another man now. Hunter put his head in his hands. The realization was too much to bear. He had tried to steal silver candlesticks worth a few $1,000s when he could have had access to deals worth millions. He had picked up pennies in front of a steamroller. The battery icon on the phone turned red, 5% remaining. On the screen, I raised my glass for a final toast. The camera zoomed in on my face. I looked directly into the lens. For a second, it felt like I was looking right into the dark, smelly living room. To the future, I said on the screen, and to leaving the dead weight behind. The screen went black. The phone died. The room plunged back into total darkness. The only sound left was the breathing of 4 people who had just realized that they were the dead weight I was talking about, and they were sinking fast. The darkness of the house had broken their pride, but it had not cured their greed. After watching the gala on the dying phone screen, a shift occurred in the psychology of my family. For days they had been paralyzed by the shock of poverty, but seeing me on that stage surrounded by billionaires and shaking hands with titans of industry ignited a new kind of desperation. They were no longer just hungry for food. They were starving for the proximity to power that they had foolishly thrown away. Hunter was the architect of the new plan. He was the one who rallied them in the sweaty living room as the sun came up. He told them that I was clearly a man of immense hidden resources, and that if they could just get back into my good graces even for a moment, they could secure their futures. He did not talk about love or reconciliation. He talked about strategy. He told Lucille to wear her most conservative dress even though it was wrinkled. He told Jasmine to stop crying and fix her hair. He told Terrence to look humble. They were preparing for a heist, but instead of guns, they were armed with apologies. They scraped together the last of their cash to pay for a taxi to the city. It was a humiliating ride. 4 adults squeezed into a sedan that smelled of stale tobacco heading toward the gleaming glass tower where I lived. When they arrived at the Sovereign, they tried to walk past the front desk with the entitlement they still believed they possessed. But the concierge, a man named Arthur, who had been a Marine for 20 years, stepped out from behind his marble counter. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cutting through their pretense. "We are here to see Franklin Dubois," Lucille said, lifting her chin. "I am his wife." Arthur looked down at his list. "Mr. Dubois is expecting no visitors, and I believe the records show he is divorced." Lucille flinched as if she had been slapped. "Just call him," she hissed. "Tell him his family is here. Tell him it is urgent." Arthur picked up the phone. I was upstairs reading the morning paper and drinking coffee. When Arthur told me they were in the lobby, I did not feel anger. I felt a cold curiosity. I wanted to see if they had learned anything. I wanted to see if the darkness had humbled them or if it had just made them better liars. "Send them to the waiting area," I told Arthur. "Do not let them near the elevators. I will come down." I took my time dressing. I chose a casual cashmere sweater and dark trousers. I wanted to look relaxed. I wanted to look like a man who slept well at night. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, I saw them. They were sitting on the velvet sofas in the guest corner. They looked like refugees from a failed state. Their clothes were expensive but unwashed. Their hair was messy. They smelled faintly of sweat and desperation. When they saw me, they stood up in unison. The performance began immediately. Lucille rushed forward, her hands clasped together, her eyes filled with tears that she had summoned on command. "Frank, oh Frank," she cried, reaching for me but stopping short when I did not move. "We have been so worried about you. We saw you on the news last night. We were so proud." I stood with my hands in my pockets. "You were proud," I repeated. "That is interesting, Lucille, because 3 days ago you called me a boring old man who was ruining your life." "I was emotional," Lucille stammered, wiping her eyes. "The stress of the retirement party, the confusion. I did not mean it. We are a family, Frank. Families fight, but they forgive." Terrence stepped up next. He looked the worst of all of them. His withdrawal from his easy life hit him hard. "Dad, look, I know I messed up," he said, his voice shaking. "I should not have asked for the money. I should have respected you more. But I am your son. I am your blood. You cannot leave us in the dark. It is inhumane." Jasmine joined in, playing the emotional card. "We miss you, Daddy. It is not about the money. We just want you back home. The house is so empty without you." I listened to them. I watched their faces. I saw the micro-expressions, the fleeting glances at my watch, the way Hunter was scanning the lobby looking for wealthy people he could impress. They were not sorry. They were inconvenienced. They did not miss me. They missed the air conditioning. They missed the credit cards. They missed the shield I provided against the world. Hunter decided it was his turn. He stepped forward, trying to look like a man of the world. "Frank," he said, using my first name, which was a mistake. "I saw you with Richard Sterling last night. That was impressive. I did not know you moved in those circles. You know I have always admired him. I was thinking maybe if we put this ugliness behind us, you could introduce me. I have some ideas that he would love." There it was, the truth. Hunter did not want forgiveness. He wanted access. He wanted to use me as a stepping stone to get to a bigger wallet. I let out a short, dry laugh. "You want an introduction to Richard Sterling?" I asked. "Hunter, you tried to steal my silverware 2 nights ago. You think I would introduce a thief to my business partners?" Hunter's face turned red. "I explained that to the police," he muttered. "It was a misunderstanding." I held up a hand to stop him. I looked at all of them. "You say you want to be a family again. You say you are sorry. You say you want to come home." "Yes," Lucille cried, nodding frantically. "Yes, Frank, let us start over." "Very well," I said. I walked over to the concierge desk and picked up a leather folder I had prepared earlier. I knew they would come. I knew exactly what they would say. I walked back to them and placed the folder on the coffee table. "If you want to be a family, we need to reset the terms of our relationship," I said. "I am willing to give you a second chance." Relief washed over their faces. It was pathetic to watch. They thought they had won. They thought the old Frank the doormat was back. "Thank you, Frank," Lucille exhaled. "I knew you still loved me. When can we turn the power back on?" "Read the document first," I said, pointing to the folder. Terrence opened it. He began to read aloud. "The Dubois Family Rehabilitation Contract." He frowned. "What is this?" he asked. "Keep reading," I said. Terrence squinted at the text. Clause 1. All parties agree to renounce any and all claims to the Dubois Family Trust, the Dubois Foundation, and the personal estate of Franklin Dubois. He stopped. He looked up at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I am disinheriting you," I said calmly. "If you sign this, you get $0 from my estate. Not now, not when I die, never." "But you said a second chance," Jasmine whined. "I am getting to that," I said. "Read Clause 2, Terrence read. Clause 2. To prove financial responsibility, each party must secure full-time employment for a period of no less than 12 months. This employment cannot be in a family business. It must be an entry-level position. Proof of income must be submitted monthly." "Entry-level." Hunter scoffed. "You want me to flip burgers? I want you to learn the value of $1, I said. And finally, Clause 3. During this probationary period, the parties will reside in a rental property designated by Franklin Dubois. The rent will be paid by the parties from their earned wages. No allowance, no gifts." Terrence dropped the folder on the table as if it were burning hot. "This is a joke, right?" he said. "You cannot be serious." "I am deadly serious," I said. "You said you wanted a family. You said it was not about the money. This contract guarantees that. If you sign this, I will pay off your current debts to the loan sharks and the credit card companies so you can start fresh at zero. I will help you find jobs. But you will never see another penny of my fortune. You will build your own lives." The silence in the lobby was absolute. The doorman was pretending to look at a computer screen, but I knew he was listening. So Lucille said, her voice trembling with rage, "You want us to work like dogs. You want us to live in poverty while you sit up there in your penthouse drinking champagne with your billionaire friends. I want you to become adults," I said. "I offered you a lifeline, Lucille. I offered to clear the debts. That is more than you deserve. You are a monster," she screamed. The mask fell off completely. The tears vanished, replaced by the ugly snarl of greed. "You are a sadistic control freak. You just want to humiliate us. I am not the one who clapped when you served divorce papers," I said. "Screw you, Dad," Terrence shouted, standing up and getting in my face. "You think you are better than us. You are just a lonely old man. Keep your money. I do not need your help. I will sue you. I will take everything. You tried that," I reminded him. "You failed." Hunter grabbed Jasmine's arm. "Come on, let us go. He is enjoying this. He is sick. I hope you choke on your money, Frank. I really do." Jasmine looked at me. For a second, I saw hesitation. I saw that she knew this was her only way out. But then she looked at her mother and her husband, and the peer pressure of toxicity won. She sneered at me. "I hate you," she whispered. I watched them turn on me. I watched them spew the venom that had been hiding behind their fake apologies. They did not want a father or a husband. They wanted a sponsor. And when the sponsor asked for accountability, they revolted. I picked up the folder. "The offer is rescinded," I said coldly. "Get out," Lucille screamed. "No," I said. "You get out. This is my home. You are trespassing." I nodded to Arthur. He pressed a button under the desk. Two large security guards stepped out from the back office. They walked toward my family. "Please escort these individuals off the premises," I said, turning my back on them, "and ensure they do not return." I walked toward the elevators. Behind me, I heard Lucille screaming curses. I heard Hunter shouting threats. I heard the scuffle as security physically removed them from the lobby. I did not look back. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse. As the doors closed, cutting off the sound of their rage, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had given them a choice. The door had been open for a brief moment, but they were too weighed down by their own egos to walk through it. The elevator rose, lifting me away from the noise, away from the toxicity, away from the past. They had made their choice. Now they would have to live with it. And I would live with the silence, which was sounding more like music every day. The clock started ticking at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. The sun was beating down on the white siding of the colonial house, exposing the peeling paint and the neglected lawn that had not been watered in a week. Inside the house, the air was heavy with the smell of defeat. Lucille, Jasmine, and Terrence were sitting in the living room like statues, waiting for a miracle that was not coming. They were still reeling from the humiliation in the lobby of my building. They had gone there expecting a check, and they had returned with a rejection so absolute it left them breathless. They heard a car pull into the driveway. It was not the pizza delivery guy. It was not a friend. It was a white sedan with the seal of the Fulton County Sheriff Department on the door. A deputy stepped out. He was a large man with a thick mustache and a clipboard. He walked up the driveway with the heavy, purposeful stride of a man who delivers bad news for a living. He did not ring the doorbell because he knew there was no power. He banged on the solid oak door with his fist. The sound echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Lucille jumped. She looked at Terrence. "Go see who it is," she whispered. "I am not going," Terrence hissed. "It is probably the police coming back for Hunter." The banging came again, louder this time. "Sheriff Department, open up." Lucille stood up, shaking. She walked to the door and opened it a crack. The heat from outside rushed in, clashing with the stale air of the house. "Are you Lucille Dubois?" the deputy asked. "Yes," she said. He handed her a piece of paper. It was not an envelope. It was a bright orange sticker. He peeled the backing off and slapped it right onto the front door at eye level. The sound of his hand hitting the sticker against the wood was final. "This is a notice to vacate," the deputy said. "The property owner has obtained an emergency eviction order based on unauthorized occupancy and criminal activity on the premises. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings and vacate the property. If you are still here at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, you will be forcibly removed for trespassing. 48 hours. Lucille gasped. "But we have nowhere to go. This is my home." "Not anymore, ma'am," the deputy said, touching the brim of his hat. "You have been served. Good luck." He turned and walked away. Lucille stood there staring at the orange sticker. It was glowing like a warning sign. 48 hours. 2 days. That was all the time she had left to pack 30 years of a life she had taken for granted. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was watering her petunias. She stopped and looked at the orange sticker. She shook her head and went back to her flowers. The neighborhood had already moved on. The Dubois family was no longer the envy of the street. They were a cautionary tale. Inside the house, the announcement triggered a chaotic explosion. The paralysis broke and was replaced by a frantic, terrified energy. Jasmine ran upstairs screaming. She grabbed every suitcase she could find. She started throwing clothes into them indiscriminately. Silk blouses were shoved in with dirty socks. Designer shoes were tossed in without their boxes. She was not packing. She was looting her own life. "I cannot lose my shoes," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "These are Louboutins. They cost $1,000. Where am I going to put them?" Terrence was in his room trying to salvage his electronics. He was wrapping his gaming console in a towel. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. He saw a man who had bragged about being an entrepreneur now packing his life into a cardboard box like a college student who had flunked out. He smashed a framed photo of the family on his dresser. The glass shattered. It felt good to break something since everything around him was already broken. Down in the master bedroom, Hunter was moving with a cold, precise speed. He was not throwing things. He was selecting. He packed his suits. He packed his watches, the ones he had not sold yet. He packed his toiletries. He zipped up his leather weekender bag. It was the only bag he was taking. He walked into the hallway and met Jasmine. She was dragging a massive suitcase down the stairs, struggling with the weight. "Hunter, help me," she cried. "It is too heavy. We need to load the car. We can stay at a motel until we figure this out." Hunter did not help her with the suitcase. He stepped over it. He walked past her and headed for the front door. "Where are you going?" Jasmine asked, breathing hard. "The car is in the garage." "I am not taking the car," Hunter said without looking back. "That car is in your name, Jasmine, and you cannot afford the gas. I called a friend. He is picking me up at the corner." "Picking you up," Jasmine dropped the suitcase handle. "What do you mean? We have to stick together. We are married." Hunter stopped. He turned around. His face was a mask of indifference. The charm, the smile, the love, it was all gone. It had been scrubbed away by poverty. "We are not married," Jasmine Hunter said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "We were a business arrangement. You provided the lifestyle and I provided the arm candy, but the business is bankrupt." He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked eerily similar to the one Lucille had thrown at me at the party. "I filed this morning," Hunter said, tossing the paper onto the pile of clothes spilling out of her suitcase. "Irreconcilable differences. I cannot be married to a woman who is about to be homeless. It is bad for my brand." "Your brand," Jasmine screamed. "You are a thief. You are facing jail time." "And you are a sinking ship," Hunter said. "My lawyer says I can get a plea deal if I testify against your mother. So that is what I am going to do. Good luck with the move, princess." He walked out the door. He stepped past the orange sticker without blinking. Jasmine stood at the bottom of the stairs staring at the divorce papers lying on top of her designer dress. It was a perfect circle. A cruel, poetic justice. She had laughed when I was served. Now she was the one watching her husband walk away when she needed him most. She sank to the floor and let out a wail that shook the walls. It was the sound of a spoiled child realizing that the world does not care about her tears. Lucille was in the kitchen, ignoring the chaos upstairs. She was sitting by the landline phone, which surprisingly still had a dial tone, even though I had cut the long-distance service. She was trying to save herself. She had a small address book open on the table. It was filled with names of the women she had lunched with for decades, the women she had gossiped with, the women she thought were her sisters. She dialed the first number. Marilyn. Marilyn was her best friend. They had gone to Cabo together last year. "Hello," Marilyn answered. "Marilyn, it is," Lucille said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh." There was a pause. "Hi, Lucille." "Marilyn, I am in a bit of a jam," Lucille said, forcing a laugh. "Frank has gone crazy. He is kicking us out. It is just a legal maneuver, but we need a place to stay for a few days until my lawyers fix this. I was wondering if we could use your guest cottage." Silence. Then a cold sigh. "Lucille." I do not think that is a good idea, Marilyn said. Why not? Lucille asked. We have been friends for 20 years. We were friends with the couple, Marilyn said. We were friends with Frank and Lucille. But frankly, Lucille, everyone is talking. We saw the news. We heard about Hunter getting arrested. We heard about the gambling debts. That is all lies, Lucille cried. Frank is smearing me. Is he? Marilyn asked. Because my husband plays golf with Frank. He says Frank has been covering your debts for years. Look, Lucille, I cannot get involved. We have a reputation to uphold. Please do not call here again. Click. Lucille stared at the phone. She dialed the next number. Linda. Linda picked up. Look, Lucille, I am going to be honest, she said before Lucille could even speak. We are having a dinner party tonight. Frank is coming. He is the guest of honor. It would be very awkward if you were sleeping in my guest room while I was toasting your ex-husband. But I have nowhere to go, Lucille whispered. Try a shelter, Linda suggested. Or maybe ask your children to support you. Isn't that what you always bragged about? How successful they were. Click. She dialed a third number, a fourth, a fifth. It was the same story every time. Some did not answer. Some blocked her number. The ones who did answer were brief and brutal. They did not want to catch the contagion of failure. They had liked Lucille because she threw great parties and gave expensive gifts. They did not like Lucille, the destitute divorcee with a criminal son-in-law. Lucille dropped the receiver. It dangled by the cord, swinging back and forth, hitting the wall with a dull thud. She looked around the kitchen. It was the room where she had commanded caterers. It was the room where she had complained that the granite countertops were the wrong shade of gray. Now it was just a room she had to leave. She realized that I had not just taken the money. I had taken the social standing. I was the source of the gravity that held her world together. Without me, she was just a debris field floating in space. She put her head on the table and closed her eyes. She wished she could go back to the moment on the stage. She wished she could take back the microphone. But life is not a rehearsal. You play the scene and then you live with the reviews. And the reviews were in. She was canceled. The sun rose over Willow Creek Drive on Thursday morning like a harsh spotlight illuminating the wreckage of a plane crash. The deadline on the orange sticker was 9 in the morning, and by 8:30 the front lawn of the Colonial Estate looked like a yard sale gone wrong. There were no professional movers with padded trucks and uniforms. There was no organized system of boxes and labels. Instead, there was a chaotic sprawl of possessions that had been dragged out of the house in a panic. Lucille, Jasmine, and Terrence were running against the clock, and they were losing. The driveway was littered with the detritus of their former lives. Expensive silk dresses were stuffed into black plastic garbage bags that sat on the hot asphalt looking like bags of trash. A collection of designer handbags was piled precariously on top of a laundry basket filled with dirty towels. A flat-screen television sat on the grass leaning against a tree because it would not fit into Jasmine-'s sedan. The scene was the definition of a walk of shame. The neighbors, the same people Lucille had hosted for wine and cheese nights, were not pretending to look away anymore. Mrs. Higgins was standing on her porch with her arms crossed, watching the spectacle with a grim satisfaction. The gardener from next door stopped his leaf blower to watch Terrence struggle with a heavy box of gaming equipment. Terrence dropped the box and the sound of cracking plastic echoed through the quiet street. He kicked the tire of his car and let out a scream of frustration that made the birds fly away. Jasmine was in a state of catatonic shock. She was wearing a pair of sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, her hair matted and unwashed. She was trying to shove a giant suitcase into the trunk of her car, but the trunk was already full of shoes. She pushed and shoved, crying hysterically. "It will not fit," she wailed, slamming her fists against the trunk lid. "Nothing fits. What am I supposed to do with my winter coats? What am I supposed to do with my boots? Leave them," Terrence shouted from the other side of the car. "Just leave them, Jasmine. We do not have room. We do not have time. The sheriff is coming back in 30 minutes. Lucille was moving slower than the others. She was carrying a box of kitchenware. It was the heavy Le Creuset pots she had insisted on buying years ago. She took 2 steps down the driveway, and her knees buckled. She dropped the box. The heavy cast-iron pots spilled out onto the concrete, chipping the enamel. She stared at them. She did not try to pick them up. She just looked at the ruined cookware and realized that she had nowhere to cook anyway. She sat down on the front steps, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She looked at the house. The front door was wide open, like a mouth screaming. The windows were dark. It looked abandoned already, even though they were still standing in the driveway. The humiliation was physical. It was in the sweat soaking their clothes. It was in the way they avoided making eye contact with the neighbors. It was in the pathetic pile of plastic bags that contained the remnants of their high society status. They were not leaving with dignity. They were being purged. At exactly 8:55, a black SUV turned onto the street. It moved slowly, silently, like a hearse. It did not pull into the driveway because the driveway was blocked by the debris of their eviction. The car stopped at the curb. The driver door opened. I stepped out. I was wearing a simple navy blue polo shirt and khaki trousers. I had a clipboard in my hand. I did not come alone. A white van pulled up behind me. The side of the van read Metro Locksmith and Security. 2 men in jumpsuits got out carrying toolboxes and drills. The silence that fell over the driveway was instant. Jasmine stopped crying. Terrence stopped cursing. Lucille stood up from the steps, smoothing her wrinkled shirt, trying to summon a ghost of her former authority. I walked up the driveway, stepping over a bag of clothes that had split open, spilling designer jeans onto the dirt. I did not look at my family. I walked past them as if they were invisible. I walked straight to the front door. I turned to the locksmiths. "Start with the back door and the garage," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Then do the side gates. Leave the front door for last. I want a complete rekey. Master system. No duplicates." "Yes, Mr. Dubois," the head locksmith said, marching past Lucille into the house. I followed them inside. I began my inspection. I walked into the living room. The air was stifling hot and smelled of old food. I looked at the walls. There were scuff marks where they had dragged furniture out. I made a note on my clipboard. Living room wall damage repainting required deductible from assets. I walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator door was open. A puddle of lukewarm water had leaked onto the hardwood floor. The smell was atrocious. I stepped over the puddle. Water damage, hardwood flooring resurfacing required. Lucille followed me into the kitchen. She stood by the island wringing her hands. "Frank," she whispered. "Frank, please. You do not have to do this. We are leaving. You see we are leaving." I did not answer. I opened the pantry. It was empty except for a few spilled bags of rice. I closed the door. "Frank, talk to me," she begged. "Where are we supposed to go? The hotels are full. We have no cash." I turned and looked at her. I looked at the woman who had shared my bed for 30 years. I looked for the wife I had loved, but I only saw a stranger who had tried to destroy me. "You have a car," I said. "You have items to sell. You have your freedom. That is more than most people start with." I walked past her into the hallway. I went upstairs. I checked Terrence's room. It was a pigsty. There were holes in the drywall where he had punched it in anger. I noted it down. I checked Jasmine's room. Makeup stains on the carpet. Noted. I came back downstairs. The locksmiths were already drilling out the deadbolt on the front door. The sound was a high-pitched whine that grated on the nerves. Zzzt, zzzt. Clank. The old brass lock, the lock that Lucille had used to keep out the world, hit the floor. Jasmine and Terrence were standing in the foyer holding the last of their boxes. They watched the locksmith install the new shiny silver hardware. They watched the physical barrier being erected between them and their past. "Time to go," I said, checking my watch. "It is 9 o'clock. The sheriff will be here in 5 minutes to verify vacancy. Unless you want to be arrested for trespassing again, I suggest you move your items off the property line." Terrence glared at me. "You are enjoying this, aren't you? You love seeing us suffer." "I am not enjoying it, Terrence," I said. "I am finalizing a business transaction. This house is an asset of the foundation. You are liabilities. I am removing the liabilities to protect the asset. It is simple logistics." Terrence spat on the floor. He shouldered his box and walked out. Jasmine followed him, sobbing quietly, clutching a stuffed animal from her childhood. Lucille was the last one. She stood in the foyer looking around. She looked at the spot where the Christmas tree used to go. She looked at the stairs where she had taken prom photos of the kids. She looked at the dining room where she had hosted her dinner parties. "It is all gone," she whispered. "Everything. It was gone the moment you signed those divorce papers, Lucille," I said. "You just didn't realize it until now." She looked at me. Her eyes were hollow. "I am an old woman, Frank. Who will take care of me?" I walked to the door and held it open. The bright sunlight poured in blinding and hot. "You will take care of yourself," I said, "or you will not. That is no longer my concern." She walked slowly toward the door. She stepped over the threshold. As soon as her foot hit the porch mat, I signaled the locksmith. He slammed the door shut. The sound was heavy and final. I heard the click of the new deadbolt sliding into place. I walked out the side door and came around to the front of the house. Lucille was standing by the car. Terrence and Jasmine were arguing about how to fit the last bag in. The car was sitting low on its suspension, weighed down by the burden of their materialism. Lucille looked at me one last time. She was standing next to the pile of garbage bags on the curb. She looked small. She looked defeated. "Frank," she said, her voice trembling, "we have nowhere to go. The world is too big. It is too scary." I stood on the other side of the gate. I placed my hands on the iron bars. I looked at her with a calm detachment. "You wanted freedom, Lucille," I said, my voice low, but carrying the weight of a judge passing sentence. "You stood on a stage and demanded it. You told everyone I was a cage." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Well, Lucille, the cage is open. You have the whole world to go to now. Go find your happiness." I turned my back on them. I walked back toward the house. Behind me, I heard the engine of Jasmine's car struggle to start. It coughed and sputtered before finally turning over. I heard the tires crunch on the gravel. I heard them drive away slowly, carrying their trash bags and their regrets down the street. I did not look back. I walked into the empty, silent house. The air was hot, but it was clean. The smell of their desperation was already fading. I took a deep breath. I was alone in a house that was too big for one man, but for the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged to me. I took out my phone and called the real estate agent. "List it," I said. "Sell it all. The furniture, the art, the house. Everything goes." I was done with the past. I was ready to build something new. And as I stood in the quiet hallway, I knew that while they were driving toward a dead end, I was just finding the on-ramp to the rest of my life. 3 months is not a long time in the grand scheme of the universe, but for Lucille Dubois, it was an eternity. The woman who once spent her afternoons choosing between a Swedish massage and deep tissue therapy was now standing behind Register 4 at the discount mart on the edge of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sound that drilled into her skull like a dentist drill. Her feet were swollen inside cheap orthopedic shoes that she had bought at a thrift store. She wore a blue polyester vest that smelled faintly of the previous owner and had a stain on the pocket that she could not wash out. The customer in front of her was a woman in her 30s holding a screaming toddler and a basket full of frozen dinners. Lucille was trying to scan a bag of frozen peas, but the barcode was crinkled and covered in frost. She tried once. "Beep, error." She tried again. "Beep, error." "Excuse me," the woman snapped, tapping her long acrylic nails on the metal counter. "Can you hurry up? My ice cream is melting and I have a life to get back to. Unlike some people." "I am trying," Lucille said, her voice hoarse from saying "Welcome to Discount Mart" 500 times that day. "The machine is sensitive. It is not the machine," the woman sneered, rolling her eyes. "It is you. You are too slow. You are too old to be doing this. Why do they hire geriatric people anyway? You should be in a home watching daytime television." Lucille felt the sting of tears prickling behind her eyelids, but she did not let them fall. She remembered how she used to treat service workers. She remembered yelling at a waiter because her soup was lukewarm. She remembered snapping at a valet because he took 3 minutes to retrieve her Mercedes. She remembered looking down on people just like this woman was looking down on her now. Karma was not just a concept in a book. It was a customer with a bad attitude and a declined debit card standing right in front of her. "I am sorry, ma'am," Lucille whispered, bowing her head. "Let me type in the code manually." She punched in the numbers with trembling fingers. Her arthritis was flaring up in the damp air conditioning. She used to take expensive supplements and go to therapy for her joints. Now she just took generic aspirin and grit her teeth until the pain became a dull throb. Finally, the machine beeped. "That will be $24.50, Lucille said. The woman threw a $20 bill and a handful of sticky change onto the moving conveyor belt. "Count it," she said, picking up her toddler. "And do not take all day." Lucille picked up the coins one by one. Her hands, which used to hold crystal champagne flutes and sign checks she did not earn, now smelled of dirty copper and hand sanitizer. She counted the change. It was short by 10 cents. She did not say anything. She did not have the energy to argue. She reached into her own vest pocket and pulled out a dime. It was her last dime until payday on Friday, but she put it in the drawer just to make the woman leave. As the automatic doors slid shut behind the customer, Lucille looked at her reflection in the plexiglass shield. The arrogant socialite was dead. All that remained was employee number 426, and she had 5 hours left on her shift before she could sit down. Across the city, the humidity was choking the streets, and Terrence was sweating inside a helmet that was 2 sizes too small. He was riding a beat-up scooter with a Domino pizza box strapped to the back. The man who had once leased a Range Rover and talked about seed capital was now praying that the GPS would not lead him to a neighborhood where he knew people. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. The app pinged, "Drop off at the Heights." It was a luxury condo complex downtown. Terrence felt a knot in his stomach. He used to attend rooftop parties there. He used to date a girl who lived in the penthouse. He pulled up to the valet stand. The valet waved him toward the service entrance around the back near the dumpsters. Delivery for 12B. Terrence told the doorman, keeping his visor down and his head low. He took the elevator up. He walked down the plush carpeted hallway that smelled of expensive cleaning products and fresh flowers. He knocked on door 12B. The door opened. Standing there holding a craft beer was a man named Bradley. Bradley had been in Terrence's fraternity in college. Bradley was one of the people Terrence had pitched his failed startup to just 6 months ago. "Pizza is here," Bradley yelled back into the apartment. "How much is it, bro?" $22.50, Terrence mumbled, looking at the floor, hoping the pattern of the carpet would swallow him whole. Bradley froze. He leaned in closer, squinting. "Terrence, is that you?" Terrence wanted to run. He wanted to drop this pizza and sprint down the stairs, but he needed this job. He needed the tips to pay his share of the rent. "Yeah, Bradley. It is me," Terrence said, lifting his visor slightly, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Just helping out a friend with his franchise, you know, learning the logistics from the ground up." He tried to lie, but the lie died in his throat. Bradley looked at the scooter helmet. He looked at the stained uniform. He saw the truth in Terrence's eyes. "Wow," Bradley said softly. "I heard about your dad cutting you off. I heard about the eviction. I did not know it was this bad." Here Bradley handed him a $50 bill. "Keep the change, man. Seriously, keep it. You need it more than I do." Terrence took the money. It burned his hand. It was pity money. It was charity from a man he used to consider an equal. "Thanks," he whispered. He walked away without looking back. He got into the service elevator and punched the wall until his knuckles bled. He realized that the only thing heavier than a stack of pizzas was the weight of his own wasted potential. Meanwhile, Jasmine was lying on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment in a neighborhood where the police sirens were the nightly lullaby. The walls were paper thin. She could hear her neighbor arguing with his girlfriend about drug money. She could smell the cabbage someone was cooking down the hall. She looked at her hands. Her long acrylic nails were gone. She had chewed them off in anxiety. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun because she could not afford the conditioner she needed to tame it. She had tried to sell her designer clothes online, but she had been scammed by a buyer and lost her best Gucci bag. Now she was selling knockoff cosmetics on social media to a following that had dwindled to almost nothing. She picked up her phone. She scrolled through old photos. Photos of her by the pool at the Colonial House. Photos of her holding shopping bags. They looked like pictures of a different person, a dead person. She realized that she had never actually achieved anything. She had just been a passenger in her father's car, and now she was walking barefoot on broken glass. Later that night, the three of them met at a diner near the bus station. It was the only place they could afford where the coffee was free with a meal. They sat in a booth with cracked vinyl seats that pinched their legs. They did not talk about getting rich. They did not talk about lawsuits. They talked about survival. "My feet hurt," Lucille said, rubbing her ankles. "I need new insoles, but they cost $12. I made $40 in tips tonight," Terrence said, staring at his coffee. "But the scooter needs oil and my rent share is due." Jasmine just stirred her soup, which was mostly broth. "I saw Dad today," she said quietly. Lucille froze. Her hand stopped midway to her mouth. "Where?" "On a billboard," Jasmine said. "Downtown. It was an ad for the foundation." He looked happy. He looked really happy. They fell silent. For the first time, there was no anger in the silence. There was no scheming. There was no plan to win him back. They had spent 3 months waiting for me to call. They had spent 3 months thinking this was a test and that if they just suffered enough, I would swoop in and save them. But as the seasons changed from summer to autumn, the truth had finally settled into their bones like the cold, damp air. "He is not coming back," Lucille said. She took a sip of her weak coffee. "The check has cleared. The account is closed. We are on our own." And in that moment, in a dirty diner under flickering lights, they finally became a family. Not a happy family, not a rich family, but a real family bound together by the consequences of their own actions. They ate their cheap meal in silence, knowing that the man they had called a tyrant was the only reason they had ever tasted steak. And now, as they walked out into the cold night to catch the bus, they understood that the heaviest door in the world is the one you slammed shut yourself. They looked toward the city skyline where the lights were shining bright, but they knew that those lights were no longer for them. They belonged to the darkness now, and they had to learn to see in it. The water of the Atlantic Ocean was calm and blue, stretching out to meet the horizon like a sheet of polished sapphire. I stood at the helm of my 40-foot cruiser, the Second Chance, feeling the salt spray on my face and the steady thrum of the engine beneath my feet. For 40 years I had moved cargo across these waters, worrying about schedules and tariffs and profit margins. Now I moved across them simply because I could. I was no longer Franklin the logistics manager or Franklin the bank account. I was just Franklin the captain. Beside me stood a young man named Marcus. Marcus was 22 years old. He had grown up in the foster system a few miles from where my old colonial house stood. He had no father. He had no inheritance. But he had a mind like a steel trap and a hunger to learn that reminded me of myself at his age. I had met him through the Foundation Scholarship Program. He was studying supply chain management, and every Saturday we took the boat out, not just to fish, but to talk business. "Pull the line in gently, Marcus," I said, my voice low and encouraging. "Do not fight the current. Work with it." Marcus nodded, his eyes focused intently on the task. He did not complain about the sun. He did not check his phone every 5 minutes. He listened. He absorbed. When he caught a fish, he did not brag about its size. He thanked me for teaching him how to bait the hook. I looked at him and I felt a warmth in my chest that I had not felt with Terrence in decades. I realized that fatherhood is not about biology. It is about investment. I had poured millions of dollars into Terrence and got nothing but weeds. I was pouring time and wisdom into Marcus, and I was seeing a harvest of character. We docked the boat in the early afternoon. The marina was quiet. I walked down the pier with a cooler full of fresh snapper. I drove my modest truck, not a luxury sedan, back to the penthouse. I had sold the penthouse too, actually. I bought a smaller place, a townhouse with a rooftop garden near the botanical gardens. It was quieter. It was mine. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my garden. I was growing tomatoes and peppers. There is something profoundly healing about putting your hands in the dirt. The soil does not care how much money you have. It does not care about your social status. It only cares if you tend to it. If you water it and protect it from pests, it gives you fruit. It is a simple, honest contract, unlike the marriage I had endured for 30 years. I was pruning the basil plants when the buzzer on the gate rang. It was the mail carrier. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the front gate. The carrier handed me a small stack of letters. Most of them were from the foundation updates on the students we were helping. But at the bottom of the stack was an envelope that made my heart skip a beat, not out of love, but out of a reflexive memory of stress. The envelope was pink. It was perfumed. The handwriting was looping and frantic, written with a purple gel pen. I recognized the script immediately. It was Lucille. I walked back to the garden bench and sat down. I held the envelope in my rough hands. It felt light. It felt cheap. I looked at the postmark. It was mailed from a zip code on the outskirts of the city, a neighborhood known for payday loan shops and weekly motels. I knew exactly what was inside without opening it. It would start with an apology. It would use words like confusion and mistake. Then it would pivot to nostalgia. She would remind me of our honeymoon or the day the children were born. She would try to hook into my guilt. And then on the second page, the hook would be revealed. She would ask for money, not a lot at first, just enough for rent, just enough for medicine, just enough to get back on her feet. I held the letter up to the sunlight. I could see the shadow of the folded paper inside. It was a trap made of ink and paper designed to pull me back into the toxicity I had escaped. If I opened it, I would hear her voice in my head. If I read her words, I would be engaging with her narrative. I did not open it. I took the envelope in both hands. The paper was thick, but my resolve was stronger. I ripped it in half. The sound of tearing paper was sharp and satisfying in the quiet garden. I put the two halves together and ripped them again, and again. I tore the letter until it was nothing but purple and pink confetti. I stood up and walked to the compost bin in the corner of the garden. This bin was where I put the dead leaves, the potato peels, the things that had no use anymore. I opened the lid and tossed the pieces of Lucille letter inside. I watched them mix with the coffee grounds and the eggshells. In a few months, nature would break them down. The worms and the microbes would eat her lies and turn them into fertilizer. Her words would eventually become soil that would feed my tomatoes. It was the only useful thing Lucille had ever done for me. I closed the lid. I dusted off my hands. I felt lighter. There was no curiosity about what she had written. There was only the peace of a man who knows that some chapters of a book are not meant to be reread. They are meant to be closed, so the next one can begin. I went back to my basil plants. The scent of the herbs was fresh and clean. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the city. I looked out over the skyline. Somewhere out there in that vast city, Lucille was probably waiting by a phone hoping for a rescue. Terrence was probably delivering pizzas. Jasmine was probably scrolling through social media feeling bitter. But here in my garden there was only silence. For a long time I thought silence was a punishment. I thought the quiet house meant I was alone. But now I understood the truth. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers. I thought about the word family. We are taught that family is blood. We are taught that you must sacrifice everything for the people who share your DNA. But that is a lie. That is a lie that keeps good men in chains. Family is not who you are related to. Family is who respects you. Family is who stands by you when the money runs out. Family is the people who bring soup when you are sick, not the people who ask for the will when you are healthy. I had spent my life building a fortress to protect people who were trying to tear it down from the inside. I had been a king in the business world, but a jester in my own home. I had let them treat me like a wallet with a heartbeat, but the jester was dead. The wallet was closed. I looked at the tomato ripening on the vine. It was red and firm. I picked it. It was warm from the sun. I took a bite. It was sweet and acidic and real. It tasted like freedom. I am 68 years old. Most people think my life is over. They think this is the epilogue. But they are wrong. This is the prologue. I have a boat to captain. I have a garden to tend. I have young minds like Marcus to mold. I have a legacy to build that will outlast my name. I wiped my mouth and stood up. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of purple and orange in the sky. The city lights were flickering on one by one. I was not afraid of the dark anymore. I welcomed it. Because in the dark, the stars shine the brightest. I am Franklin Dubois. I am a black man. I am a father to those who deserve it. I am a king. And for the first time in my life, I am finally home. The most important lesson I learned is that you cannot buy respect. For years I thought I was being a good father by providing everything, but I was only feeding a monster called entitlement. True love is not about shielding people from the consequences of their actions. It is about letting them fall so they can learn how to stand up. I realized that keeping the peace at the cost of your own dignity is a price too high to pay. A family is built on mutual care, not a credit limit. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing. If you believe that Franklin made the right decision to walk away, let me know in the comments below. Would you have forgiven them, or would you have changed the locks just like he did? Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice. Until next time.